give you kind of a cheer for the morning. There was a huge number of responses to that, and we called it no-charge licensed software, which confused people out of the gate because they wanted to be FOSS. But we wanted to get a position that was, what did people want as providers of software to the government community to be true, so that the government got the best benefit? And it was a huge number of people responding. But we also wanted to keep the scope inclusive of things like, for example, Adobe is free software, like the Reader, but it's not open source and it's not based on open standards, it's based on Adobe standards. So the whole idea of that, what did that mean? So here were some of the findings, really, were that people tended to say you really needed to have a process that considered everybody fairly. At Treasury Board, we were always pro open source from the point of view that it should be equally considered with every other choice. But we really didn't give any guidance. It didn't come through with clear guidance for departments that took the perceived risk away. And that's what your challenge, really, that you face with any kind of an open source approach, is that perceived risk. And as soon as legal's in the room, you're going to have to deal with that. But it's worth dealing with. There were a couple things that legal tended to be very, very fussed about. One was this idea of limitation of liability, and whose laws were the licenses kind of based under. Was it Canada or California or somewhere else? So first of all, make sure that's dealt with. So whether you're dealing with one of the providers here that either directly you get software from or provides for you, or provides support, those are things that represent comfort from a procurement vantage point of the government. So what came as a theme in the RFI from all the respondents was try and have the same process, both proprietary and open. Try and be inclusive, because the cost of the license is perceived to be a dramatic difference, and it may really not be. When you include all of the things about sourcing, how it fits with your whole architecture and infrastructure of your organization, and what kind of uptake there is in the market. If you look today versus 2 or 3 years ago with Drupal, just looking at what others have done and the adoption level and how people have accomplished what they have with this kind of technology framework is a really good news story. So what we found in government is sometimes if you can't be clear in everything, tell the stories. And senior executives start to say, oh, well, that department, these people are using it and they're getting this benefit, then it's worth investigating. So really all fully costed, aligned with your architecture. We got some really good information from how Agriculture Canada had done that in terms of creating an approach and a set of gates for considering what kind of technology they're going to use. And the whole idea of covering off liability, what we found was a lot of, don't assume that lawyers of all your legal team understand software. Those of you that are in federal departments are probably where any person who's a lawyer that you have to deal with in terms of looking at bringing in new software technologies or procurement, it actually works for Justice Canada, not your department. Of course, you all know that. But the way Justice puts the teams out, it's not necessarily based, they don't all have experts in everything. They're your team. So they may have to go back to Justice and that. Don't assume they understand all the issues. So one of them that came up consistently, and it took us a while to realize we had to kind of educate the legal teams on, was this idea of community and contributing back, and how important in an open source environment, first of all, your obligations to try and participate, because usually the participation level follows like the social media participation level. It's like 90% lurkers, just use this stuff. Don't actually contribute, 9% maybe contribute a little bit, and 1% tend to be the core contributors. You find that with Linux and many other things, that there's a core known group of strong contributors in the community. But it's important to contribute back in some fashion, and making sure your acquisition and legal people fully understand that is very, very important for them to kind of stop with this perceived, but you can't get your grip around the risks that they think are there. The risks really aren't there if you cover up all bases. So, that's kind of one of my, the things we found out strongly. The other thing is reference the people that finally, Gartner is actually acknowledging a number of open source whereas in the past they were considered that they didn't do so much. But if you look at Alfresco, if you look at Drupal in the various quadrants, they're in a pretty solid position there. So you've got that as a reference too. So going forward, I hope you enjoy the morning, and you've got some well-known and well-thought-out names here. It's just in your department is looking at, or if you're an advisor or consultant to departments, these are the things, the journey they're going to have to go through to look at how to procure this, and make sure all the costs are in, and you should end up with a great result. And I think, as you'll see, these technologies are emerging as pretty solid in the business environment. So I hope you have a good morning, and it's hopefully helpful insights.
Thank you, John. Right, to finish up on a couple of things that you mentioned that made me think, we just went through a contract, and there was that element of discussing intellectual property that always comes up, and with open source, we usually just point to the GNU public license, and we can usually get around that a little bit more easily now. So just by pointing back to the general public license that manages the intellectual property. So yeah, I mean, as far as the event today, we want to make sure you understood all of your FOSS options correctly. We've had one-on-one meetings with a lot of people, both in government and NGOs, and we're getting a really mixed bag signal with respect to understanding of what's available to you and some of the envelope that encompasses some of these tools. So there's a lot of great information that we want to pass on to you today. So one common misnomer also is that, and I say all of this from experience of having heard feedback from people, but there are enterprise people involved in open source that are contributing, and it's not necessarily people in their basements that are just getting around or that are very young and just getting into programming that develop these tools. You do have people that are seasoned, that have been around the industry for a long time. Both the other guest speakers that are here today are veterans in development. Myself, my background was as an IBM Domino Certified Most Professional, was my take into the industry going back 15 years ago. Did end up starting a company called TechSupport.ca with a partner that worked at EDS, and it did do quite well out of the gates. Within 36 months, we were ranked in the top 100 fastest growing companies in Canada. I got into HTML quite young. As soon as it came out, I really jumped into to that, and I started teaching it at a college. Of course, I was always the youngest guy in the room teaching HTML. It was interesting enough. But one thing that we've often gone through is, as we got more towards content management for websites, which is often where content management someone started, we all built our own tools. So I, no different than anybody else, had built my own CMS tool on an IBM platform. And it didn't take long to start seeing the Mambos, which is now Joomla, and the Drupals coming out, and taking a look at the source code behind and saying, well, there's something here, a lot of people contributing and getting a lot more out of the gates. Didn't take long to become a FOSS advocate. One thing to note about OpenPlus is we are unbiased to the technology, and it does give us the opportunity to be fully transparent towards that. Evidently, we don't make money on licensing, and there is no software involved. We've done projects on Plone, Moodle, Alfresco, Drupal, and there is an overlap on some of these tools you have to keep in mind. So there, for example, on Alfresco, there is a web content management component to it. Evidently, Drupal is well known for its web content management. Which one you would use in what scenario are elements that having somebody that's unbiased is always good from a consulting standpoint to get good feedback on. Married, 2 kids, 1 dog, and I'm almost good at hockey. I do speak French, and that's all something that's come up quite a bit, because we know that there's been a lack of French support in some of the delivery, of accessibility of some of these components. The tools themselves are very multilingual. There's no concerns with that. It's more having a service where somebody has to deal with somebody who strictly are able to deliver the products and the service in French. That's been difficult to try to find really good qualified multilingual people. I'm not going to get too much in details, but we have done projects coast to coast, and sometimes we've got as much as 4 or 5 of these projects in the hopper at the same time. We are very active in the advocacy. We are going to be representing Alfresco at GTech. We'll be at booth 630. And evidently our network is something that's quite important. So it made a lot of sense for us to interact with Modus. They bring a lot of senior experience to projects when it comes to having analysts that need to be there, or senior project managers that have specific experience with government, and who can also work around the procurement headaches that people like myself, we like to focus on the technology, and you almost have to be full-time into just understanding procurement. So it's been a really good marriage when it comes to that. Evidently working with partners, we've got 2 people that are going to be coming up here and speaking, but all of that encompassing makes sure and assures that you've got an experienced team that's accessible from consulting to integration, maintenance, and training. So at the beginning of this is a little bit dry, but just with respect to understanding typical open source, open source is technically just software that has no specific copyright around it. It is governed strictly by GNU or GPL, public license, and it just allows people like us to be able to recommend, apply, and change and own the source code to do with it what we will. But I wanted to just identify the differences between FOSS and FLOSS, because open source has been talked out now. You guys have probably been hearing it for close to 10 years. The only discussion that was held at GTEC last year was by Microsoft on OpenPlus, on that open source. So, that tells you how the ranges have moved. You won't hear them talk about FOSS or FLOSS. Even in my own household, my wife being a dental hygienist, FLOSS is a very confusing term. But free open source software, there's a difference. We're not here to promote Linux. Evidently, it's a platform of choice for servers, but that's not necessarily what this is about. So, Firefox is an open source piece of software, if you will, but we're talking strictly about applications level, and that's been often warranted with FOSS technologies. So typically, particularly under GNU, open source models, the good, the bad, and the hopeless. A good open source model, for the most part, won't have a corporate head on it. So if you're pissed off at Drupal and you want to call up the CEO, you won't be able to. There's no corporate head. It's completely transparent. Here are the tools. There's good governance. There's good stewardship. Mike, I believe, is is a core contributor. I think one of the only ones. I think the only one in Ottawa, and he can talk about the rigorous process with respect to getting code inside the core of Drupal. But it just shows how there are commercial open source projects, which you have to be careful with. I don't necessarily call it the bait and switch, but there are products like Sugar CRMs that are widely popular in the CRM realm. But the open source community edition has less features than the paid for licensing to get enhanced features. You have to be cognizant of those scenarios. And you can still get into a licensing scenario under open source. So licensing can still apply towards open source. You just have to be making sure you're adapting the right tools. We only support FOSS and FLOSS initiatives, period. So if there is licensing, or special receipt licensing, it's a no-go for us. So we do want the transparency of these tools. It is ironic how, Microsoft, Oracle, there was a bit of that, we're not anti these tools. We work with these platforms before, we support it, and we know that they sometimes need to interact with your environment. But, it's funny how before it was a risk, they were advocating risk with open source, and now they're all sort of on that bandwagon. The way we look at it is the community will drive the success factor of the environment. So when you look at Microsoft and Oracle taking on initiatives on open source, you have to question how well those initiatives are going to do, because a community that contributes towards open source demands pure transparency, and that's been sometimes somewhat questionable. So Drupal technically doesn't have a corporate head. You may have come across Aquia. The founder, Dries, has his own outfit that he runs and manages. They do offer extension training, support. I know that there's a PWGSC site here that's getting, I believe, support and monitoring from this Aquia group. So, you need 24/7 enterprise support that's available still from Drupal, just because there's no corporate head. On the flip side, Alfresco does have a corporate entity on it, but it is pure play. And when we say pure play, it doesn't matter whether you download the community edition or you get the enterprise edition, you're getting the same features. You're not pulling back any features at all. So that is important to understand. There is licensing available through Alfresco, but it is strictly for enterprise support. That's really all you're getting. So if you want a higher-end environment that will do clustering, that can really go on an enterprise scale, it's nice to know that you can call Alfresco. You can get that 24/7. You can get the core abilities of the tool. You can get a certified cluster-capable stack. So those are the benefits of having an Alfresco environment. So evidently, there's been a lot of movement on FOSS. Before we're getting into Drupal, I'm just touching base on a few other things here. There's been a lot of movement around the world on it when you're seeing other countries. I know Russia, Vladimir Putin himself has stated in December that he wants the entire government to to operate under open source. It's pretty interesting to hear himself even say that and put out a statement on that. We know Barack Obama has been pushing for open source and openness in government as well. China, France says they want to become an open source center of excellence for government. Now, there's a couple of elements behind that. Some of them are doing this from a security standpoint. It's not that they necessarily mistrust, but I think there is a concern that they have potential intellectual property residing in Microsoft local environments, and it's not necessarily, from a country, you can start seeing where maybe there's concerns there. Ironically, whitehouse.gov is powered by Drupal, and CIA.gov is powered by POM. Those are open source tools and not necessarily residing on some of those platforms. There is a link here. I won't get through this video, but there's an actual a good video. It's available on our website, which is Open Source for America, and it talks about open source and the need for it and how the U.S. has been adopting it quite rapidly. All right, so can free software be better? Something I'm often asked. We all know that if we're at home and we get a call and somebody's trying to give us something for free, we'll hang up. But when it gets to open source, if you get the right tools, it's just a matter of getting that right information sent to you. Linux is a good example of a success story. It is a de facto standard, in my opinion, now with respect to performance, stability, and evidently value. This is an interesting chart that's managed by the BBC. It's rated 2010, but this is effectively all of the world's supercomputers, and it's a grid that, in this case, right now is being viewed by application. And every one of these boxes represents one supercomputer. So I think that big one in the top corner here is 200,000 plus cores. But these are by application. This next slide shows by country. Canada is in the whole bottom corner here, just in case you're hunting for it. The next slide is the fun one. It shows by OS. And it goes to show you that, if you're a mission critical server environment, for the most part, Linux is more than well adopted. So free software can be better. Another quick example of one of my favorites is Firefox. So when you look at Microsoft identifying how their IE browser is very, very important to them, there's no doubt, and to see how a project which did fund off the core of Netscape and whatnot, but within 48 months, how it was able to overtake the browser statistics and win over the IE war. It demanded a lot of respect. A lot of people don't necessarily realize the impact that did for us. There'd be a lot more ActiveX stuff out there. Microsoft would still be questioning whether they need to or want to do W3C standards, and it forces standardization on a lot of people. So there's a lot of good that comes behind that. So why is open source software better? Evidently, vendor lock-in. This is a discussion I like to have with a lot of people, because for some of us, it's like you've been staring at the wall for too long and it goes over your head. But with respect to agendas and strategies, you have to acknowledge that it is all around us. You look at things like Apple's products that are coming out without Flash support. BlackBerry products can't support Flash. There's an element usually of business that's behind that, and there is usually an agenda and their own reason that they come across for doing that. Recently, when Microsoft Live came out, how you can go and author and edit Word documents and Excel documents without having a license all through just their interface, I found that quite surprising, and we looked into it and we thought, oh, this is either not going to work in Firefox, or there's a hook, there's something. And sure enough, it won't work if you're running an Ubuntu desktop, or if you're running a Linux desktop, and that's the hook. We know that Microsoft is concerned. That's the next round of things coming, if you will. I do believe that the Ubuntu desktop or Linux-based desktops will start taking over. But it is interesting how they're somewhat sacrificing one of their more popular products to secure their most popular product in the OS. So a lot of agendas are moving around, and we do get manipulated at times. Not to mention the licensing gauntlet and the jockeying that goes with that. So on the flip side, FOSS has vested interest to have and support as many standards as possible. So when you look at it just from a logic standpoint, the more things it can work with, the better it is for the tool. It makes a lot of sense. You can't say that when you have a for-profit agenda. It's better certainly because you have ownership and stewardship of your code, and your environment, so you'll never be at the mercy of another tool per se. And it grows when you sleep. That's certainly a big advocate. Sure, other tools grow when they sleep, but there's a licensing impact when you have to update and whatnot. Literally, there are hundreds of people that are accessing code and delivering more code as you sleep, so every day there's little updates that happen through it. Now, why does this matter to you? So with the government of Canada and NGOs alike, there's certainly cost pressures and reform and efficiencies that are getting pushed on the IT sector. from a government standpoint, there's certainly the public, the citizens aspect. You look at any article that touches open source on the CBC website, and you've got 500 plus comments that are spread out through it. Certainly a lot of that is the IT community. But when it comes to cost and anything in IT government, you've got pressure all around you. There's even the workforce. What we've seen is, people coming out of school now, they all know Shell, they all know Python, they all know PHP. They're not so much coming out of school now being Microsoft developers or being trained to be a specific paradigm. And so therefore, we've seen a lot of grassroots within government where Drupal is getting done from the inside up. And in those scenarios, I commend some of the senior management people that do go back to those, to their junior people and still let them get sold from the inside out. And evidently, even from a top brass perspective, whether it's an NGO or a government, there's certainly cost pressures all around us. So, there's one line I've got on the bottom of this that is sort of a bold statement, but in this day and age, it is somewhat irresponsible to not review qualified FOSS options available to you. That said, shared services is something I highlighted here with a big honk hand, because we know that we don't know. That's sort of the question. I mean, even if you look at the CBC articles that have been on shared services, we think it makes a lot of sense for that initiative with respect to email. I think they mentioned there's like 200 plus email systems out there, and with respect to networks. So there's room and a necessity, I think, for shared services. Will that cross over into the content management system? I don't see that happening per se. If it does, I can't imagine that it won't have an element of support for FOSS-based applications. So, we're hoping that people don't necessarily hold back or that they're somewhat concerned. From what we can tell, Drupal is doing quite well in government. It's getting adopted quite heavily. So, we have to assume that, they won't go against the grain for tools like that, but it's still its infancy stage and there's no sense to hold back too much on that. All right, so enough about FOSS. Why don't we jump into reviewing a couple of these tools that I'm sure you guys want to dive into. So Drupal as an intro has had a critical mass adoption. So their site now has got 670,000 registered people using it, which those are a mixture of developers, mixtures of users, advocates, whatnot. People participate on forums. Some of those are made up of government, IT people. It's in 228 countries and in 182 languages. It's got 12,000 modules. I think 3-4 months ago, it felt like that was 8,000. I had to check it again. I said, I can't believe how many more modules there were. So there's such a critical mass movement towards that. You look at DrupalCon events versus good old Lotus Sphere events. And you use a tool like Google Trend. You see how one is spiking way up, and these events are getting a lot of adoption. It's estimated to power, this is off Wikipedia from last year, almost 7.2 million sites. It is arguably the largest CMS on the planet. Yet I've sat with CIOs and I've mentioned the word Drupal, and of course, not everybody knows the platform. I can understand we're in our own realm of things, but there's, Drupal and Alfresco have to be on your radar nowadays. So it is LAMP-based as a status of LAMP being Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That said, there are options to run it off other environments. You can run it on Windows. From what we've heard, Microsoft has even come to the table and recognized Drupal's success and looked at ways to run it. And there is an Aquia version, I think, that you can run on a Windows environment. There's also workarounds with VMware. I'll throw off a quick little video here that just is a good walkthrough on. A good intro towards Drupal.
Thousands of open source contributors have worked for over 3 years to bring you Drupal 7, the most flexible and easy to use version of Drupal ever. Drupal already runs hundreds of thousands of websites, including some you probably already know. Many different types of businesses, government agencies, nonprofits, and individuals have all discovered that Drupal gives them the speed and power that they need in a free, easy-to-learn, open-source package. Now Drupal 7 introduces usability improvements such as a simplified installer, a toolbar and shortcut bar that keeps often-used commands close at hand, reorganized content, users, and configuration screens, and much, much more. Drupal 7 also has dozens of improvements for developers and system administrators, such as a flexible new field system, better update maintenance procedures, and ways to connect Drupal to just about any database you can find. Drupal can be used to create a wide variety of different types of websites. Drupal core has the ability to create new content types and add custom text, images, or file fields to content or even users. Drupal's extensive taxonomy system allows you to create flexible organization of your content based on categories or tags. With an energized and fast-growing developer community and thousands of free add-on modules to choose from, it's easy to extend Drupal with functionalities such as message boards, photo galleries, audio and video management, date and calendar management, geolocation, rating systems, e-commerce, and the list goes on and on. If you've been using a previous version, download Drupal 7 now to discover all the great changes. Popular modules you've been using are probably already available, or part of Drupal 7 itself. If you're using another content management system, or you're thinking about setting up a new website, see how easy it can be to create your own feature-rich, highly customized website with Drupal 7. Download Drupal 7 now from Drupal.org. Drupal 7, easier and more powerful than ever.
Amen. All right, so a couple of things that are interesting, I guess, to note in that we've had experience with a lot of other tools. You look at environments like Joomla, WordPress, evidently those have had critical mass adoption themselves. But there is reason why Drupal, I think, is pushed to the lead of the pack when it comes to enterprise applications. For example, I mean, we've got other sites that we use that run Joomla, but when you think that ACL, access control list, and the permission grid didn't really come into effect until 1.6, which is quite recently, I think it's this year or last year. So you looked at, before that, there wasn't any ACL. So it was a CMS that in my opinion was much, less enterprise and certainly not for government. And WordPress, I think, is a blogging engine that went too far. Certainly when I look at an environment like Drupal, there's nothing that Drupal can do, in my opinion, that WordPress can. I got a couple of giggles here from some people, but I say that lightly. It's got a lot of capabilities, but when you really need to push that envelope, keep in mind that the CMS or this platform is going to move you forward on a lot of other initiatives down the road. So it's got to have the flexibility to be able to tie into other environments. And when I think WordPress, I don't think enterprise. Some business factors with respect to Drupal that are important to know. Critical mass adoption. I don't say that lightly because we were a big Plone shop at one point. If you're looking for Plone, which is another CMS, it's based off Python and Zope. It's harder to find good quality people that can support it. It's a great application, great framework, and is in use by a lot of universities. It's used by several good government departments in the US and around the world. But it is hard to find good resources. And that's a factor. That's a factor you need to comprehend. So with critical mass adoption, you go to chapter, you're going to find a dozen books on Drupal. If you yell Drupal in a chapter, you'll probably get some feedback from somebody in there. And that's a good sign that there's a good user group that's available and very participatory in Ottawa. It is true FOSS. It evolves and grows when you sleep. More than enough community modules. It has a lot of APIs and can work with as many standards as you can shake a stick at. And people are turning it into their own platform and their own framework. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, how it can do a lot more than just a CMS. Keep in mind, D&D is using it as in their intranet. It's not a forward public-facing site. It's not just a CMS. It can be used for a heck of a lot of other things. Secure. So this is security and maintenance are often the two big objective, throwbacks that I get from people when I meet with them. So security is, why there's this notion that a Microsoft or Oracle-based application typically would be ultimately much more secure. They're still developed by people. They're still integrated by people. The risk is always there for the most part. It is nice to us to see that CA.gov had chosen Plone to run its CMS. White House is powered solely by Drupal. I mean, that spells a lot. So it is in use by government now. It is well adopted. There is just good IT business management capabilities and being able to harden a good LAMP box. And there's a lot of options there to be able to manage security. And even down to the option of just managing IP if you're going to keep it within your wall, which is why I think it got rendered into D&D quite easily in the sense that it's just not going to be accessible by the public. Performance and scalability. That's the benefit of, it's not a homebrew CMS. It's an environment that can run that runs on Linux and Apache. And those environments are very tweakable to be able to really push the envelope on performance. You can assume that the White House can have at any minute a few million hits on any given day, especially when you have an event that happens. So it is not only for security, but with performance, the fact that they went to that platform, again, spells volumes. With Varnish, with some memory allocation tools, there's a lot of ways that you can really push the performance. And when I say push, it's not 3 or 4 times better. You can literally, if you compare a vanilla simple Drupal site to one that's been fully optimized for performance, you can get 400 or 500 times plus the performance out of it. There's ways to manage that. So addressing accessibility, that's a big hot topic in itself, and that'll be Mike Gifford's area. He's going to be coming up and talking about it. But pressure to adopt globally, and I'll ask one always, yes, it's free. Because that should never be the primary factor for integrating these tools. If you're just going to Drupal because it's free, then you haven't been participating to events like this, or you've had your hat in the sand, because I believe it is the best CMS out there, and still to this day I welcome anything or any other component that we can take a look at, whether it's Interwoven or any of these other tools, and look at them and compare them. There's more flexibilities and more capabilities in these tools. So who's drinking the Drupal Kool-Aid that's good to know about? I mean, there's a lot of them, evidently. I just put down some noteworthy ones. WhiteHouse.gov, New York Times, which I think was stated as the biggest Drupal site on the planet at one point. Time Warner's has a lot of artists that they deploy on that, so a very eclectic mix there from what I've heard. You could have Avril Lavigne down to Led Zeppelin, Bob Dylan. The sites are powered by, you saw the Rolling Stone ones a few minutes ago. So a huge array. So you've got a lot of NGOs, Amnesty International, White House and private sector is all alike using it. Some local and interesting adoptions, PWGSC. So there's a site when you're on Merck's, you probably see it all the time. When you're on the Merck site, you've got an actual red leaf and it says right there, buy-sell.gc.ca. That's a site powered by PWGSC. Mike's worked on that site. DMD's using it in their intranet. NRCan is a well-known adopter, and I believe they're looking at the multi-site functions that they want to run a lot of sites off of it. Canadian Transport Agency has recently adopted. We're going to show a quick screenshot of it. Peter Lindstrom is supposed to come to the room. He worked on the project. Industry Canada, the CRC site, Ottawa Public Library, Carleton University Library, Oxfam Global Canada, and several other sites. Canadian Tourism, the NDP Party site, Green Party, Canadian Tax Mayors Federation. Also, interestingly, here to the side, we've got recent activity. If I were to say in the last sort of 6 months, maybe some a little bit longer, some a little bit less, but the RCMP, which is also a great, dealing with security performance, is moving to Drupal 7. That's in the works now. They're doing that in-house. And again, that's that element of transparency. You don't have to deal with a firm like us to integrate Drupal. There will be reasoning why we think that there's good consulting scenario there to do that. But it's nice that departments can still complete ownership and complete transparency and do it in-house if they need to. Statistics Canada, I believe they're in the room, and they're moving to Drupal, and I think there's discussions with Alfresco. I think that's in the mix as well. Standards Council of Canada, which is a derivative of Industry Canada, they had moved to life for about a year ago. That's a project that we've got in the hopper. That'll be a nice site there using Solar and indexing a lot of external environments to try to do unified faceted searches. They're doing a mobile app. That's a project that's in the hopper as we speak. Mike and I are working together collectively on that project. Canadian Border Services, I know that they were at the prototype stage, I believe. Health Canada, they've been rumored to be using it in their labs for a long time. The issue is when you're Microsoft and you sell a license to somebody, you can easily pop out a list of who's using it. There's no trail for this stuff, so it's really just with respect to the community of who's using it. You don't necessarily know. So a couple of quick screenshots again just to show diversity. The White House website, buy-sell.gc site that Mike worked on. I think this was one of the first larger Drupal sites in government, and certainly crossed a big threshold. This is a site that is supported and monitored by Acquia, which is directly from the founders. And it's nice to know that within this room we have access to, with Mike to speak to Dries directly should we need to, or to the Acquia group. This is the new CTA site that just went live. I guess it was about 5-6 months ago. It's powered by Drupal also. Japanese site, Canadian Museum of Human Rights, New York Times. And again, this site is very, very designy, if you will. goodness milk, I forget the exact name of the site, but again, the content doesn't have to be dry. You can have a nice media site, but you can have a dry content-based site in the Carleton University Library. So the uses and deployments for Drupal are quite varied. Microsite, it's got a multi-site capability, so you can share certain Drupal services and deploy many sites and restrict certain features within. So whether they're internal sites, whether it's an extranet, an intranet, something going outside, inside, there's a lot of uses for it. This is the last slide before I get into bringing Mike up here, but these are some technical factors, and there's a lot on this grid. I'm going to touch on a few of them. But keep in mind that if you're CMS or you have anything that you're pushing out to the web right now, it should be doing all of this, if not, at least some of it. But SEO, just the fact that it's SEO friendly and the way it'll read out things is important. The fact that it can tie into analytics, human readable URLs, and your ability to be able to override those paths that you may want to control are important. RDFA and semantic web, that's a new standard that's out in Drupal 7. Mike can maybe talk about that a little bit more, but that's something that's got us a bit excited. Evidently, some very modular API that can work with a lot of environments. Solar can give an environment like Drupal or any Solar is effectively an indexing engine, if you will, that can work with a series of databases, and it is a good way to be able to tap into any other external database that you might have, where you want the data to be presented unified via Drupal. And you can still do some aliasing, I believe, to be able to present data that's sitting in another grid. Where that becomes quite interesting is if you've got accessibility problems with other environments, you might be able to parse it or put the front end of Drupal on it, meet your accessibility guidelines, use environments like maybe Solar to be able to accommodate accessibility standards that you need to deal with. Theming, templating, version control, evidently having the ability to see who changed what, highlighting colors, comparing, regarding those types of capabilities. Some of those aren't necessarily core to Drupal. Some of those are add-ons. Drupal itself will not even ship with a WYSIWYG. It comes with no editor. That's surprising to a lot of people, but it does want you to be able to make your choices. That's going to stem off into why you probably want to deal with firms like us for consulting and integration, lessons learned. You have options when it comes down to your WYSIWYG. Which one should you use? We've got a lot of advice into which one you probably want to use and the reason why. But an advanced WYSIWYG will go a long way for correctly managing multilingual environments. It's one thing to have a system that is multilingual and can do string translations for you, but what about a good WYSIWYG that can support and have a dictionary of choice and whatnot for managing the content of your environment? Accessibility. Mike will talk about, a lot of people are shooting for level 2A. We talk about CLF2 till I'm red in the face at this point, but when it comes to international standards on accessibility with websites, WK and level 2A, level 2, there's A, AA, and AAA. And Mike's a well-known expert in that field, and out of the box, no CMS can really meet 2A, but Drupal is well positioned for accessibility. These top 4 here are quite important for me, and I want you to seize those top 4 because when you look at role-based permission machinery and user ACL, the ability to manage groups and have a granular access to who can do author what, who can edit what, etc. When you have an action workflow built in, so on this condition, under these events, run this this action, and then when you factor in content types, so for us, the CMS is title, body, and then yes, publish it, or it's tagged as English or tagged as French. But you can add your own content types. There could be several fields or a dozen fields involved with that. Effectively, that's an app when you think about it, right? So if you can manage your permissions, and you keep in mind you inherit everything else on this screen. So now you have a workflow, a multilingual environment. We're going to be talking a little bit about how you want to consider even potentially using Drupal for other means or other little applications within your environments. Somewhat database agnostic. Out of the gates, it'll run a few databases, but you saw through that video that's got an Oracle collector and whatnot. Multilingual is a given. It's a good framework for managing multilingual environments. .po file with respect to, there's a whole translation area for Drupal where again the community and translators contribute to it. There is a French Canada language pack, an English Canada language pack, and so on and so forth. Multi-site functionality, we sort of touched on caching and varnishing the fact that you can scale the environment. So great, you can run it internally with minimal resources, but what if this has to become a mainstream app to use and you can scale it until HTML5 and CSS3 friendly. When you're getting into more advanced environments, you can use tools like Drush, which are command line capabilities for more, call it administrative or light scripting through tools like Drush. And there are the ability to do profiled installers where you can simplify your cloning, your capability of duplicating your environment. So effectively, call it a basket, put all of your eggs in that basket. I want a multilingual, I want to set up this way, these are the modules I want to use, and you set up your profile and you can easily redeploy that environment. So this is the last slide before Mike. So if you need a database for any reason, you have to question, if my database is going to be used by users that are going to use it in a browser, likely, there's that need that stems off having a database need for whatever reason, but you have to think about the fact that it can become a framework. So yes, you can create a content type right through an interface. You don't have to have PHP, MyAdmin interface capabilities or anything like that. You can get the fields you want right through the interface of Drupal. You can manage the roles and permissions. You can set a workflow on it. Whether you need the balance of these tools now, you might need them later. So, having a translation capable environment, collaborative, so commenting is built into Drupal. It's just sitting there dormant. It's off. If you want it, it's a one-click enablement. Analytics, add-on accessibility. Accessibility is a big one, evidently, because you got to be cautious moving forward. If you're developing an environment or pushing out an environment that has no accessibility or limited accessibility confinements. Extendable, again, that's I think where FOSS shines. It's got every vested interest in working on as many environments as possible. CMIS is something that's coming out loud and proud, if you will, and there's a lot of people that are tapping into it. Evidently secure and familiar. So I wanted to bring Mike up here. Mike is a very respected and experienced and well-known Drupal evangelist, core contributor to the actual core of Drupal, I think the only one in Ottawa. Accessibility champion. He's also a co-contributor to the definitive guide for Drupal 7. Mike is the owner of Open Concept Consulting, which he operates in Ottawa. We've done some projects together when need be. We do projects separately when need be. And I like that last line. I'm almost certain he has a Drupal tattoo somewhere. I don't know about that.
So yes, this is a large book that was just published in August, the definitive guide to Drupal 7. If anyone wants to learn about Drupal 7 and is trying to find out more, then I encourage you to ask the first question. So we'll be giving out this book to the first person that asks the question, and we're in the question and answer period. So this is a book that was written by community members, a wide range of Drupal core contributors, and it's something that I've been quite proud to be part of, and I think it's a really interesting initiative to have. There's a lot of advantages to looking at setting. Move this down. So yes, my name is Mike Gifford, and I've been contributing a lot in the last 3 years to Drupal's accessibility and to Drupal 7's accessibility, although we actually started contributing with multilingual work because being in Ottawa, making sure that we had bilingual websites and we were able to deliver bilingual websites was very important. So we had a CMS that we were running before we moved to Drupal, and at the time when we were looking at Drupal adoption at Drupal 4.6, it really didn't have enough to go off to compare with the system that we were using before. So as Drupal continued, we started moving over to Drupal 4.8. Drupal 5, we no longer had to go off and hack the core of Drupal in order to go off and make it be bilingual. And Drupal 6, multilingual capacity got brought into core for Drupal 7. And this was a really big thing because...
Just before you go ahead, it's not for the book, I have a question. Will this presentation be made available? Because I'm writing down a lot of stuff and I'd rather...
Yes, I'll definitely share the deck off our website.
You could?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. That was not
Drupal 5 no longer had to hack core to go up and make it multilingual. Drupal 6, there was multilingual capacity was built into core, and that's continued on with Drupal 7. But there's a huge element in terms of making, including multilingual capabilities in the core of a content management system. is not easy to do, and a lot of systems do it badly, and they sort of tack on multilingual capacity sort of at the end. There's Alex is here from Accessibility Web, from Evolving Web in Montreal, and he and some of our team were participating in an internationalization sprint last week with a number of people internationally who are looking at improving the multilingual capacity for Drupal 8, and Drupal 8 isn't going to be released for probably another 2 years, but there's a huge effort already to go out and to take the initiative to find other ways to make internationalization even better. But because internationalization was brought into core in Drupal 6, there's a lot of the basics have been included in the work that's been done. So we've done things like take all of the contributed modules have been brought in and have looked at or not all of them, but most of the contributed modules have support for multilingual capability. There's translation strings that have been included. There's been a large localization effort that's been done to incorporate various different languages easier for people to go out to implement. So I just jumped again a little bit and talked about the multilingual capabilities a bit more, but I want to talk about the looking at accessibility and human rights, looking at the common look and feel and its relationship to accessibility. Talk briefly about the web framework, which is being developed by TDS, and finally looking at Drupal 7 and the work of Drupal 7. A couple other small things. One is that we're Acme partners, so we've done work with Acme and tried to go up and set up relationships so that in many ways we see this as it's an additional source of insurance to be able to have support on a level where you can contact many of the other core developers to go up and ask questions or to participate in forums and get closer access to the people who are involved in the Drupal community. They have set up the White House site and have some tips in terms of how to go out and build a more secure framework, with questions about load or server issues, or there are advantages to being part of the Acme network, and we can provide enterprise level support for people that do need to have 24/7 support for their applications. So multilingual core, it's definitely a huge issue, and it's something that is continuing to evolve as more and more websites need to become multilingual, not just delivered in one language, but delivered effectively in both languages. And in Canada, there's a lot of instances where through the federal government, where there's where websites need to follow the Official Languages Act, where all content needs to be translated and available both languages. But there's often variations in terms of what people mean when we talk about a website being multilingual, and different departments, different agencies sometimes have slightly different rules in terms of what is available, what is close to it. How do you deal with comments if you're going to be including comments, and how do you deal with other pieces of information that are on the that are not as standard as a static web page? One of the most interesting websites that we've been involved in is one called Just Vision. That is based in. It's a very graphic website, but it's looking at peace in the Middle East, and trying to go out and to do work to encourage peace in the Middle East, and it needs to be in both English, Hebrew, and Arabic. So it's trilingual and bidirectional. So that's definitely a challenge, and one that Drupal's able to meet. It's not the first bidirectional website we've been involved in, but it's certainly the most complicated that we've implemented. And we also, as Robert mentioned, we're involved in helping to set up the PWGSC's Cell website. So the accessibility is a really important issue, and it's also there's legal reasons why we have to start considering accessibility issues. So I wanted to talk briefly about who it is we're dealing with and who are the people that we're talking about needing to go out and make a website accessible. Who is that for? So in Canada, there's about 3 million people who, in one way or the other, benefit from improvements in website accessibility, which is a significant part of the population. These are people who are blind, people who are vision impaired, people who are just using reading glasses, people who have hearing or speech problems, mobility problems, people with learning disabilities and cognitive disabilities. There's a huge range of people who are who have one or more disabilities. That makes it difficult to go up and to interact with the and to get information from government websites and from other websites. And more we're having websites being formed not only to get information but also to interact with government, whether it's filling in online forms or being able to sign up for a newsletter or an update about something that's happening in your community. It's a really important part of participating in our society. Canada last year signed a UN Convention for the rights of persons with disabilities, and this is an interesting, certainly interesting initiative to try and look at how do we support the citizens of Canada, and how do we look at those people who have disabilities and work to go out and ensure that the information presented by the Government of Canada is presented in as accessible format as possible. And the Government of Canada, the Treasury Board, has been doing a lot of work to make it easier for government websites to be accessible. And the CLF has included accessibility as a component in it from the very beginning. But there was a court case last year that ended the decision was handed out in November of last year, rather, between Donna Johan and the Attorney General of Canada. And the judge at that point decided his decision was that the Government of Canada had 15 months to go out and make all Government of Canada websites accessible to people with visual disabilities. And that's a huge task considering the number of public web pages that are out there. And so not too surprisingly, the Government of Canada appealed, and the appeal process, we're still in that appeal process. I don't think the decisions guys come through with that. But the Government of Canada is moving ahead to go off to continue to improve the accessibility of these websites and changing the structure of the CLF to go up and to use the latest WK guidelines. WK is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so instead of using WK 1.0, as of this August, the CLF requires you to make your websites based on the WK 2.0 standard. So, we've got a compilation of CLF 1, CLF 2, and some sort of ideas that have come out for CLF 3. Not that they would call it CLF 3, but the new look and feel for the CLF that were proposed last year and the year before. But all of this is just branding. It doesn't actually get into the challenge of making your websites CLF 2.0 compliant. So one of the things about the web is that it's changing pretty quickly, and like the technology itself, the standards around it are going to change quite quickly. So when there's in the United States, there's Section 508, which is a common standard that was released in 1998. The CLF1 was released, I believe, in 1999. I believe that CLF1 was released in 2000. I think that's what it was. But the standards for what were required for accessibility are changing, and the technology is changing. Right now, people are expecting interactive forums. People are expecting there to be a pop-up dialogues. They're expecting lightbox effects, and they're expecting interesting effects that are making websites more like television than they were before. They're much more interactive, much more dynamic, and that produces pretty significant changes to the accessibility. Even things like adding sliders to the front pages of your website. There's a number of websites that I've seen that were quite accessible, but decided to go up and add a slider mechanism to the front page because it was neat and funky and cool. But in adding the slider to the website, they didn't actually go through and revisit the accessibility of that, and they implemented a slider that wasn't particularly accessible. So they were introducing the accessibility problems after the fact in order to keep up with what's trending in the web. So one of the interesting things about the new CLF accessibility guidelines is that the government departments are going to need to have all public pages are going to need to be that aren't archived, but all public pages are going to need to be WK2 AA compliant by July of 2013, which is a lot better than the 15 months that the judge originally ordered in the Donald Jordan case. But it still is going to be quite a challenge to go through to update web pages, especially considering so many Government of Canada web pages are based on static HTML. The other piece is that that CIOs or another sort of appointee of the CIO is required to be sitting on this, be appointed as a representative to the CLF office for each department. So there's going to be management involvement or responsibility directly with the CLF accessibility components. Just in case people don't know what WCAG stands for, and perhaps I should have put this earlier, it's based on a series of principles around ensuring that websites are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable is easy to understand. People need to be able to understand the information and absorb it. Operable is things like forms, being able to fill in the web form and get information, enter new information into the web form. Understandable is a bit trickier. You're dealing with, in a lot of cases, things like usability and also readability. So trying to make sure that your text is written in plain language. That's part of the WK process, is making sure that the content is written for the appropriate audience. And finally, that it's robust. That you're not going to, when you suddenly move to a mobile platform, you're going to suddenly be losing access to the accessibility, or that it's only going to be accessible for one particular platform you develop for. It's important to go and have the system be, to have your website be working on a cross-platform process or framework. The Treasury Board has been looking at the challenge of making government websites accessible for a long time, and the CLF office is a small group of people that is tasked with the huge challenge of trying to go out and make to help governments go out and implement more accessible websites. And they were running into a problem where they were given information like the sliders, and the government department would come to them and say, we've got this slider, is it accessible? And the CLF office would need to go and evaluate each individual slider that's being presented, and each one will be a little bit different, and you've got so many different pieces of assistive technology that are involved in doing this. It was a very big challenge to go out and to run through all of the sort of the widgets that were being implemented by different government departments and evaluate whether or not there were accessibility challenges, and work with the different departments to find a solution for them. So WED has a framework and a number of widgets that they've tested and they've developed and that are available for people to use and download through IRCAN, which is ircan.gc.ca, which is a site for sharing intellectual resources with the Government of Canada. On the issue of sharing resources and contributing back to the community, this is definitely a challenge that a lot of a lot of departments are struggling with. But the method that's being implemented for WET, which is I think quite innovative, is that the code that's written under WET is copyright. It's under a Crown copyright, but it's distributed under the MIT license. So there's the ownership issue is addressed by still claiming the Crown copyright, but the distribution mechanism is the MIT license. So you're free to. It's even more open than the GPL, because in the MIT license you don't need to claim. You don't need to go up and to credit the original owners. You're free to go up and to include and embed in other pieces. It's even more open than GPL. They're working on trying to develop and test common patterns, and so there's a jQuery tools that have been developed. It's quite useful that the WET framework, which is recommended for government departments, is based on jQuery, because that's the library that Drupal uses, and there's a big Drupal community that uses. Drupal 6 and 7 come with jQuery, and Drupal 7 comes with the same version of jQuery that the WET framework is based on. So there's already a lot of common tools that are available for both platforms. But it's also great that there's a community of people in the government of Canada who has a common set of requirements who are working on supporting these issues. There's a lot of the effort to make and test and evaluate websites and widgets is quite an onerous process, and it certainly isn't something that can be assessed by running into a quick, easy validator. There's a lot of steps involved to make sure that the assistive technology works with it. It is a bit of a challenge. And the web framework is being updated every 6 months, so that's another useful piece. So what's different about Drupal 7? So a picture with some of the Drupal 7 accessibility contributors, including Everett Zufeld, Kate, and Brandon Bowser-Socks. But Drupal is different partly because of the involvement of people with disabilities in the process, and that we've done a lot to ensure that Drupal is accessible, not just on the implementation, or not just on the sort of final results that an anonymous user would see, but that a person who's using assistive technology can install the application, can administer the section of the website, can edit the website, and then go off and also view the website. So because we're looking at it in a more holistic fashion, we're able to go off and fix some bigger challenges that also are pieces that as we move into, as the government moves into a Web 2.0 environment where there's an expectation of there being interactivity, it makes it a lot easier. Because if the core administration is accessible, then a lot of the same widgets using the administration are going to be accessible for those people who aren't actually administering the website, for people who may just want to have a contact us form or have a more complicated feedback form or a discussion form that we've gone through and evaluated a lot of the problems that have been that are part of that and have addressed those. So we're looking at the issue queue, trying to get something into the issue queue, how difficult it is to get something into the issue queue. And people think that because it's open source, it must be really easy to change the code. Well, it is, but it's really difficult to actually get something into the core of Drupal 7 or to get it into any popular open source project. It's a real challenge. There was an accessibility, one of the first accessibility challenges that we were working on was one of addressing the CSS code display none. The problem with display none is that display none is used technically to go up and hide certain elements from the browser. And there's some pieces that you don't actually want to be shown to the user because it's clear from the position of the site, the content of the site, of the image, what it is. So you want to hide that piece off of the website. But for somebody who's using assistive technology, you might actually want that to be available to them. And the most assistive technology, like VoiceOver and JAWS and Windows Voice, have gone off and have respected display none. So we need to go off and find an alternative in CSS to allow a allow us to go up and present information that was not visible to the screen reader, but present it for assistive technology, and to do this in a consistent way. And it would be a really interesting master's thesis on the process and discussion of debates and whatnot, because I think there's probably 500 or 600 comments that go back and forth, management ideas, and testing of the code. And every time we went off and put forward an idea for a fix in Drupal 7, it had to go through a unit testing framework. And there were, I think that it started off with less tests, but by the end there were 30,000 tests being run on every individual CSS change or markup in the code. So it was a huge process to go off and to get anything into code. Even simple text changes are not simple to go off and implement. It's a matter of wading into the community, participating in the issue queue, and really making a really strong case for why your issue has the sufficient merit to bring into change core. Another great thing about Drupal is that in Drupal's accessibility is we address a lot of the issues in the form API. So there's a centralized way to go and manage forms, and we've been able to improve that. We've also added area support. Area is another WC3 initiative, and it's part of it. It's allowing for support of rich intricate applications. So like autocomplete fields and being able to use light boxes or little dialogues. And there's a lot of stuff that you need to go up and explain to assistive technology what is actually happening when you go up and pop information up on the screen. There's also a very active accessibility community that's been involved in testing, implementing, and improving the core lesson in Drupal. So I wanted to briefly, this is some more links and contact information. And this presentation will certainly be available online as well. But I wanted to talk briefly about buy and sell, just for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, to talk about our experience working with Public Works on buyandSell.gc.ca. And it was definitely a very exciting project to work with, and was happy to be involved with John Jordan and his team, and to have one of the things that they got right early on in terms of the implementation is that when you're looking at implementing Drupal, you're not just looking at the software Drupal, you also have to look at the environment that it sits in, and how you're going to maintain the code, and how you're going to go off and manage the staging, production, and development of that code. Because it's every piece of software has its own environment where it's going to work the best, and we generally tend to work in a LAMP environment, so Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, but it also works well in Windows, and Windows has been quite actively involved in the Drupal community for the last 2 or 3 years, and this is very exciting to see at the Drupal Con in London, where Alex and I were at. Microsoft is there talking about how you can run Drush in Windows. In a Windows server, you can start using Drush, using command line tools to run automated tests and automated upgrades and whatnot within the Drupal environment, or within a Windows environment for Drupal. It's exciting to see there's a crossover of blending between Windows and Drupal, and there's a wider audience of people who are able to use it because their IT departments are more comfortable in the Windows environment. And that's no longer a barrier. There's a lot of support for Windows and Drupal. But making sure that you've got a version control system, that's one of the basic pieces that they did well. They went off and adopted Git for the buy and sell, so that we can have a distributed team working on the code and have a tool set that was robust enough that it could be, you could have multiple people working on the same project, but they could be working on the website locally on their desktop, and then share pieces of it up to the main code and merge it up to the main code, and have a more robust management needs to go up to manage the implementation of the site. They also do a lot of work with IRCAN and IRCAN's their virtual servers. So aside from hosting a number of different projects like the web program, IRCAN also provides a framework for setting up prototypes and setting up the spaces for you to go up and for departments to start playing with or exploring different things. So if you wanted to set up a prototype of Drupal, in a LAN environment, they would install it, they would clone that they're able to go out and use for their development server, their staging server, and then when they're ready to move over to a production server, they've got something that they've already tested in the environment that quite extensively before they move over to the live environment. But Git is a really powerful tool. It's also one of the tools that recently Drupal has adopted for the version control for the different for Drupal core and also for all the different modules. And it's definitely a powerful framework for collaboration. And there's tools like GitHub that are doing a great amount to try and make it easier for people to collaborate and to fork the code and to try different things and experiment with what's out there and to make it easier for people to contribute back and manage that content. So Git is definitely one of the leading sources for development, collaboration, and contributions. And just before I go, I just thought I should mention that there's a really excellent install profile that's being developed by StatsCan to make it easier for people to get up and get started with Drupal 7. So out of the box, it comes with multiple capacity, it comes with many of the core modules you're needing to get going, and also with the web framework has been developed so that most of the accessibility, or many of the accessibility challenges that you're going to run into within the government Canada have been addressed in this install profile. So a good starting point to move forward to do more sense. Thank you very much, and look forward to the first question.
Thanks, Mike. I just wanted to mention one thing quickly as well. We're just going to go off to grab a quick coffee break before we jump into Alfresco and looking at ACM and then summarizing a few things as it gets around that. But we've been talking a lot about government, but evidently you've got to factor that for NGOs, this accessibility definitely is a factor. I think 4 NGOs would be the next runner-up, if you will, of government being mandated to follow certain terms. And even if you're a private entity, you do have to support accessibility as best you can. So this is all stuff that's very relevant. So why don't we just refresh, take a break, get some more coffee, talk about yourself, and then we'll be jumping off to the Enterprise Content Management, Alfresco, and then at the tail end of that, Zahid will be speaking, and we'll actually be running a virtualized instance of Alfresco and showing a few things.
How can we build more collaborative? How can we reach out to more people for the ideas and insights that they have that can possibly help build a better country? And how can we put those things into action? As open source becomes more and more important capability for American government, state, federal, and local level, we need to have a non-commercial entity that is able to really bring the ideas to Washington. So a lot of the decision makers need ways to get good information on open source, and it's always been a barrier. So the solution is open source for the big idea behind open source in America is that there's so much open source going on in the federal government and so many open source projects out there that there was no consistent voice to policymakers or Congress about open source. We wanted to provide a collective, consistent voice that advocates open source and education.
Well, I would tell people that it's going to be forced to
feature that isn't there, but I thought it was good to just show that stance. I guess we still have a few people there. Alright, so we're going to get moving here with Alfresco. Alright, so I'm just going to fire up one or two videos as a quick intro. Stories that they'd gone through, and some of it was frustrating. We're getting into some of these, the reasoning a little bit later, but I'm not going to name the department. But somebody walked up to us and said, "You know what? We installed Alfresco, we installed Drupal, we looked at it, and we found it cumbersome, or there was this or that, and they weren't overall pleased with it. But it is hard to find sometimes the right component and the right profile that will meet your specific needs. So running a vanilla environment, just going and downloading some of these platforms, it's sometimes tricky to get the experience out of it that you want. Some of you may be familiar with Alfresco just from things you've heard in the last few years. You may have just looked at the repository products. We are very excited about Alfresco, as much so as Drupal. We think it's got a requirement in the marketplace, and we know it's going to do well. It is doing well. So in the enterprise content management, which these terms are getting so confusing now, because where does enterprise content management, document management, web content management, all of these things are getting into a big gray buffer zone. There's a lot of overlaps that are happening, and it's hard to put a tool in a specific silo. That said, certain tools have their own specific capabilities and excel at certain things. Certainly Alfresco's core does very well with respect to document management. That has been one of its fortes, but with Alfresco Share and its more recent initiatives, it's definitely tapping into a field collaborative environment. It can do a lot more than just managing documents, but it can do so in a few ways. So if we take a look at the marketplace per se, there's Alfresco, there's Microsoft SharePoint, Documentum, IBM FileNet, RDM's OpenText. I think they just bought Vignette not too long ago, and then there's the Oracle Universal Content Manager, which hasn't so much competed with some of these tools above, but we did include it in this presentation. A couple of interesting components is you look at Google Trends, and some, it's not the kind of thing that you have, you can't take this to the bank, but it is an indicator, and it is something that's worth factoring when you're looking at things you're evaluating. So Google Trends is a great tool. By just typing in the right keywords, it is an evaluation, and you can drill down if there's enough volume under Google to the country specifically, and even down to seeing certain cities and activities. But it is interesting when we look at Alfresco, Documentum, and FileNet. And FYI, one of the co-founders of Alfresco was also the co-founder of Documentum, so there's been a transition there some time ago. But it is interesting to see, we've been seeing Documentum on a downward slope for a bit, and there's been some struggles with the tool, and on the flip side, we're seeing Alfresco really getting some motion into that. So again, critical mass adoption is a big factor. Alfresco can't be at, we're going to be representing them formally at GTEC. We're going to be sending up a couple of people. We're going to be at booth 630. They have their DevCon environment, their own event going on. I think that overlaps with GTEC, so there's been some issues there, but it's a factor that they can do that. But back to this slide, you've got documented file nets. You're sort of seeing a pattern there that you have to give some weight to. The other components on that, nice little graph here that shows that it can cost an arm and a leg in your firstborn. There's evidently cost factors when you've got to look at, especially when you're getting into more enterprise capabilities with document management, records management, and especially when you get into SharePoint, there can be some overwhelming cost. Alfresco has a 2-hour webinar that they've recorded that just talks about cost and makes sure that you understand the total cost of ownership, that you look at all of the implications. SharePoint is probably the more confusing one because it does tap into several other platforms, but truly understanding the cost control of it is a big aspect of this for sure. With Alfresco, there's that element, like I mentioned, where it is free. You can get the community edition. There are other components available to you from an enterprise standpoint where you can have enterprise level support if you can't have a direct licensed access to them. So I've shown you one video, but there's another one I wanted to tap into. One big thing with Alfresco right now is it's gotten so diversified, which we like to see. So some people are using it strictly from a document management standpoint, strictly from a repository. Some people are using it just to store their files. Some people are using it from a share as a full collaborative framework, which it certainly has merit to. Some people are using it, they've got an OEM partner set up. So some people build their own apps off the Alfresco frameworks. So there are some apps out there in healthcare and in a lot of industries that you're potentially using or that doctors are using that are provided by a vendor, but it's all been wrapped in their own tool and it's powered behind the scenes with Alfresco. That's a lot of a great case use for FOSS-based technologies, and Alfresco has a big market in that space. So I'm just going to there's a quick presentation here. It's about 5 minutes long, and it does talk about sort of top 10 reasons why you can think of Alfresco as a platform.
So if you're designing a content-heavy application such as a website, there are several reasons why you consider using Alfresco over a plain database. In this Alfresco quick take, I'll give you the top 10 reasons why. Number 1, content performance. Databases are great at storing text and numbers, but when it comes to more exotic types of information, they more or less store them or what is referred to as blobs or binary large objects. They don't really know a lot of how to inherently manage them. They can house them, but they don't really know how to fundamentally do anything with those objects. By contrast, Alfresco allows you to take that information, store it directly in its native format on the file system for maximum file performance. Number 2, content model flexibility. With a database, in order to store attributes or information about a piece of information, also known as metadata, you typically do that by predefining a number of columns as part of your database structure. It's great initially, it's a little more difficult to modify that, however, over time. Alfresco allows you to evolve your content model using a notion referred to as aspects. You can apply different pieces of metadata to different objects in the system as you need to kind of better fit your needs and evolve how things are managed. Number 3, granular content security. Databases are great at defining down to a table level of access to pieces of information, not so much at individual row or document levels. Alfresco gives you a fine level of granularity in terms of defining access to different objects to really control who can see what, do what, and modify different types of information within the repository. Number 4, content collaboration and version control. Databases don't really have any notion of how to deal with all the collaborative authoring aspects of building new pieces of information. It's one thing to be able to simply store a new document. It's quite another set of activities to actually maintain and accommodate all the processes that deliver new documents within a repository. And Alfresco allows you to do that directly, in that we enable certainly all the version control and security capabilities, but also all the collaborative functions around that through Alfresco Share, being able to set up collaborative spaces and invite team members and do everything around creating new versions of pieces of information. Number 5, full text and metadata search. Databases are certainly great at, again, being able to maintain all the textual pieces of information, the attributes or metadata. Some can also index into the actual content of documents themselves, but your mileage definitely varies. Different databases may or may not handle it, depending on what you're utilizing. Alfresco, by contrast, allows you to accommodate flexibility across both, whether it's a piece of information within the document, metadata that you've applied, or both. We allow you to index and search and retrieve on that information individually. Number 6, automated rules for content. So now that we have all these assets under control, how do we actually process how they're maintained within the system? Rules are a great way in Alfresco that allow you, through our user interface, to define how you automate processing of documents, regardless of how they're added into the system. You can ensure that information is always maintained and processed consistently. Number 7, out-of-the-box workflow, and a great example of what might tie actually into rules. Databases have no inherent concept of, just like with collaboration, being able to do any type of workflow capabilities. You'd either have to build that yourself or incorporate some other third-party workflow engine. Alfresco actually has included as part of its repository complete workflow functionality so that you can control revisions as you delegate off and allow people to maintain assets individually. You can delegate off and still control how they're doing things and audit and report on information that's occurring within our repository. Number 8, notifications. Being able to proactively subscribe to and notify individuals on the team of changes, revisions to a document as new documents are added into a particular collaborative space. Alfresco allows you to do that directly. If you were to do this building off of the database, again, just like with workflow, you have to build that on your own. Databases really have no inherent concept of that either. Number 9, native support for content standards for authoring. And this is probably from a business user's perspective the most important differentiator for Alfresco. The fact that you allow them to continue to contributing objects into the repository without changing the way that they're working today. We enable them to continue using Word by providing direct support off the file system through protocols such as CIFS. Allow them to contribute information through email, directly in their email client using IMAP as a standard. Additionally, through other types of tools, might be able to add objects through WebDev or FTP or even through a SharePoint protocol that allows your users in a native Office installation to take advantage of all the collaborative features that exist within the Microsoft Office suite. And finally, number 10, CMIS or CMIS is the right tool for content. Definitely don't recreate the wheel here. Databases do allow you to query information through SQL, and again, that's great for text and number-based information, but not really as inherently aware of what to do with different types of documents and some of the content management features that might be required. CMIS, or Content Management Interoperability Services, does include as part of its definition a content management specific query language. It's actually based on SQL 92, but it's aware of all the document management specific functions that might need to be executed against different pieces of information. And it's definitely a lot more the right tool for that type of a job, and a bit more effective than having to do something unnatural or standard that's not necessarily the right fit with just standard SQL. So those are the top 10 reasons why. Thanks for joining me. And if you have any additional questions, you can contact me directly at scott.davis@alfresco.com.
One thing that you start to see that sort of becomes evident is, there is an appreciation factor for having a corporate entity at Alfresco. There is that, when you're getting in an enterprise environment, you want to be able to contact Alfresco for certain things of that, when you're getting into a higher scale of environment. There are a few other videos, but I don't think we're going to be diving into those too much. Just to do some Alfresco highlights, we're going to have Zahid who's going to be talking and demoing some of the components, but evidently when it comes to enterprise content management, document management, Alfresco is the front leader with the FOSS option on the table. They've got a large community, good group. Like I mentioned, they've got their DevCon event. There are plenty of resources. There's a guide for Alfresco available. So critical mass adoption, again, plays a role. When it comes to FOSS, that is an impact. You've got to factor that. It is the largest FOSS ECM. It's the only FOSS ECM that does support the SharePoint protocol. And what we found is we've heard a lot of false starts with SharePoint. In the sense that, SharePoint does a lot of things. Some would argue too much. And, there are some scenarios where it'll do its things well, that's fine. And we've heard through other CIOs that when it comes to maneuvering left or right of that, it becomes very difficult. There isn't a way to run Alfresco side by side with SharePoint should you need to. So if you've already invested into SharePoint, there's still an opportunity potentially for Alfresco to help facilitate certain things for you, to give you more maneuverability, or to make your environment a little bit more custom. And certainly having SharePoint protocol support facilitates that moving down the road. So you can check in and check out documents directly from Office tools, for example, with Alfresco. Certainly proven technology, a lot of platform support. So when it comes to a large-scale deployment, clustered environments, something quite comprehensive, there is a support, there is an enterprise stack that's warranted and those provisions. So some of you, like I mentioned, were probably or have been exposed to Alfresco prior to Share, which was a little bit more just document data storage and code repository. But their Share initiative is really what got us much more excited about the tool per se, and that's where where the lines between a collaborative environment fall. So with Alfresco Share, you've got a document library which is effectively powered behind the scenes with the core of Alfresco repository. You've got very enhanced search capabilities, activity feed management, so who's doing what on what document, which areas do I want to manage and be notified with. A great and easy way to create virtual teams, so you can create microsites within that can extend out to the public or stay within your walls. You have that few options right when you get going. And again, this is just stuff that's out of the box with Share. But having those team spaces, you right away tap into the granularity of saying, well, I want these people to be contributors, I want these other people to only be reviewers, and they're limited to their specific and respective area. It's a very rapid way to be able to deploy a collaborative environment. It's got an interior architecture, CMIS support, which we does introduce a lot of options. And if you actually go to the Drupal site and you review the modules directory and you search for CMIS, it often gives you a list there of people who are contributing to a specific module. And the actual module, the contributors list off as Dries, the founder of Drupal directly, and every other email address after that is alfresco.com, alfresco.com, alfresco.com. So you can tell that there's a lot of equity between being able to marry these environments together. They're working well together. There are reasons why you want these tools to potentially work well together. A quick example of that is you may have a document management framework and approval framework that you would want to use for whatever purpose internally. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with documents. It could be just with information or a record. So Alfresco will do both records management and document management. But an area that's interesting with that is if you have a business process management framework that you want to manage with respect to workflow internally, and at the tail end of that, it's just a flag and working with CMIS to be able to potentially publish something off a website, for example. So either an area that it would land in or a series of tags or specific identification of workflow, there is a way to facilitate them bringing it through a website that's, for example, in Drupal. But with CMIS, you can do a lot more than just show that information. Like you mentioned, it's more than just a query. You can actually submit documents via CMIS through an environment like Drupal, and it'll go off and land into an area and initiate a workflow through content rules, etc. So there are very interesting ways that you can marry these two environments together and keep them in their own silos. Yet, if you had a very, very light requirement for a website, Alfresco does have a web content engine. It's nowhere near what Drupal has the capabilities of doing with the modules, adoption, and whatnot. Its forte was a little bit more with the tool set it supports now. Some notable adopters for Alfresco: Toyota, Home Depot, Michelin, NASA, Cisco, U.S. Army, La Poste, France, post office in France. Merck, so the pharmaceutical sector's had some good adoption in that area. Harvard, Yale, Hotels.com, Marriott. 25% of all of Alfresco's corporate revenues come from government in U.S. and abroad. So they definitely have a foothold in that sector. There's been, there's not a ton of adoption that's happened in government just yet. We're definitely hoping to change that, and the fact that it's been supported and quite deployed in other governments globally and certainly in the U.S. Is a big factor that should be considered. So we've heard of a few departments that are looking at it. Zahid has some clients that he's interacted with. I'll let him go through some of the client interactions that he's got with that. Again, it's untrackable. So we've heard forever that Health Canada is running it in their labs. What does that mean? Do we know? I don't know. But again, I sort of like that because it does point to the transparency of it, and there's potential benefits of that. So I've got 3 or 4 slides here that are going to talk about a few features, but with Zahid coming up, we'll get to see the environment more or less in action. So the Alfresco share interface is just sort of a new, fresh way and method that Alfresco brought to the table, saying this is how you'd want to see your content. And a lot of times we're talking about social, collaborative content. It's not about Facebook. Everybody hears the word social, they often relate to Facebook or a social network, but they're talking about the scenario that people are collaborating within an office to manage and share and work with content. So the share interface really manages that. Having an inline preview so that you don't have to open up the documents is certainly a big aspect. Drag and drop the email, I want to cover off some of the things that Zahid will. Version control, that's evident in any document management system, and the abilities to go and integrate what needs to happen with that. Microsoft Office integration, shared drive capabilities, rule-based, rule-based on directories. So you can have areas where if you put in a document, boom, it triggers off a content rule. And it's all through the UI. You don't necessarily need to be to be a developer. You could just be an administrator and do some lighter weight content rule management. As soon as this is tagged with the flag completed or archived, it'll automatically move it to another directory or things of that nature. Automated rules in action. Custom types. So you don't have to just, you can create your own content types, which more or less make it work like a database environment, if you will. So it's not just about working with Word and Word's metadata. There's a lot of overlaps there that you want to do. Workflow, there's overlaps with workflow. It does support the Java business process, as well as they've got their own initiative that they worked on called Activity, which more or less treats workflow like Visio would. So no different than UML or environments where you can do visual workflow planning. So you literally just drag and drop your items, connect the dots, put in your rules, and it more or less builds your workflow for you, and then it becomes available into your environment. Transformation services is a fun one. So typically, as a good example, we don't believe that people should be sharing Word documents, for example, off a website or with the public. So typically, if you're doing Word documents internally and you're approving them, once you get into your workflow that the approval cycle is done, great to fire off a rule where it will also convert that into a PDF that's ready for web, and maybe move it to another directory, and then boom, it becomes available off the website right off the bat through Seamless, for example. But the content transformation is a great part of being able to do more with workflow. Lightweight scripts, powerful aspects, I sort of talked about that. Zero footprint client is sort of self-evident. There's just nothing, if you've got a large environment with thousands of employees, it's from a desktop management standpoint, that's a big factor. You don't have to go and install necessarily a bunch of environments. You can just do some profile management, even if you do want to use some SharePoint protocol support. Replication, again, standards-driven. As you can see through that list, it's got vested interest to work with everything that it can, which we can't say about other-party tools. And in fact, we question with other-party tools. Are there other things behind the scene where SharePoint will maybe not support something for whatever reason that we don't know about? It's remarkable when you start hearing of the legal cases that are going on. Google's recent acquisition of Motorola said was done all just because of patent disputes and their defense of that with RIP. And there's constantly battles that are going on the legal side of things. And it does worry me as an IT specialist. You wonder how much of this overlaps into decisions that are actually made with certain products. High scalability, clustering, talked about that, security. So about Alfresco itself, it is the largest pure play. We sort of talked about pure play earlier on in the sense that you have all the features on the community side, and that's important to us. So we want transparency from them as much as they expect from us. They've got over 3 million downloads now with their community products. John, which is the CTO chairman, is also one of the co-founders original co-founder of Documentum. So there is a corporate head there, and they are revenue-based, but they're there to support the enterprise aspect, high enterprise aspect of what you may or may not need. It doesn't mean that you can't run an enterprise environment and still maybe run the community edition for other initiatives that you need for other reasons. So again, transparency plays a good role. Notably, some of the key investors in Alfresco Corporate is SAP Ventures. We do find things like that interesting, and SAP hasn't been a big adopter of FOSS environments, but this was an interesting series of events, if you will. So if you've been on the Alfresco site, you'll sort of see that they contain things into somewhat their silos, yet when you actually use the products, things are a lot more, work together a lot more than you would expect. So it's not that you have to go to the site and deal with document management or have the web. So Share, it really operates a lot of these components for you. Like I said, the repository component is behind the scenes, but see they've got this component here called Activity for Business Process Management. But for the most part, some people may not need to do document management, but it's always there ready for you. On the flip side, records management is something that's maybe more tailored on and off. You may have very light usage for records management, like it might be what you actually need and the reason you want to adopt Alfresco. So Jeff mentioned a little early on with Gartner, and I've been a bit of a love-hate with Gartner in the past, because at one point this Magic Quadrant was only really accessible to tools, and this was one of their directives to say if it was a 10 million or more company. And you can see why they would sort of think that way, to say, if you're not a major player, we don't even put you on the grid. Okay, that makes sense, but how does that apply for free and open source software? And so for a long time, some environments like Drupal weren't on the grid. They've come on the grid now, but I think just through them changing their minds and saying, listen, you've got to think about that. So some of you may be familiar with this if you're senior IAT executives, and the typical quadrant with ability to execute and completeness of vision. So on this grid, you've always had the typical, let's call them the leaders, and the IBM, Oracles, and the jockeying. That box is more or less done there for them. Interestingly enough, though, is they monitor that aspect of it, and if you look at the green area here, Alfresco has been the fastest moving component into the right quadrant. And that's certainly a sign that in the last 2 years, it's gotten adoption, and even Gartner has respected the tool. And the other notable aspect was that the other people were just jockeying in the same box for the most part. So, you can do what you will with this quadrant, and there is some weight to it, but it's nice to at least be able to say, yes, Alfresco is in the right quadrant of Gartner. Next. This is a slide that I like because it does show a bit of you've got enterprise content management. Really, what is content management? Workflow, compliance, control, security. That's an aspect of it. But you've seen maybe some videos about social content management. There's even the dropping of Facebook, and you could technically do some of your content collaboration from Alfresco and go out into social networks and engage at that level if you need it to be. But for the most part, when we're talking about social content, it's certainly much more within the workplace. There is a little video we might tap in a little bit later, but the sharing of information, the collaborating, linking, being notified when things have changed, activity feeds with respect to content management within an office is a great idea. This was a little bit to what I was talking about earlier on, whereas if you're buying into free and open source software because it's free, you've missed out on something. And this is a survey that they've done, and cost wasn't the driving factor behind this. The fact that it is open source, Mike talked a little bit about how hard and rigorous it is to get updates into Drupal core. But keep in mind, it doesn't prevent you from being able to run or modify your own version of it. Essentially, you can download Alfresco or Drupal and make it with it what you will to run your internal needs. There are business factors from a management standpoint where you want to make sure you don't maybe play with core too much if you want upgradability and things of that nature. So there are still some business management issues that you have to factor for things like that. But the fact that it is open source and does allow to say, hey, here's all our software, do with it what you think you need done. So, that's been the driving factor for a lot of the adoption in Alfresco. So I wanted to introduce Zahid, very, very well respected in the Alfresco community. He's hosted a lot of the Alfresco lunch and learns. The only 2 lunch and learns I think that were in Ottawa were hosted by Zahid. Some of you may have attended that. You've also hosted some lunch and learns in Toronto. Zahid is also a gold level Alfresco partner, the longest in Ontario, I believe. And he's the owner of 10th Line Consulting. They're based out of Toronto. So I wanted to invite Zahid up here to walk through a bit of the Alfresco environment.
Okay, I'm just going to actually just go to a couple of slides talk about and what we've done with Alfresco, and go to a couple of case studies, and just do a very quick demo of Alfresco Shell. Let's see. Can I just run this from here? So Templine, we're based out of Toronto. We've been around since about 2004. Alfresco was one of the longest Alfresco partners in Canada, actually. Prior to partnering with Alfresco, we've been providing similar kind of services using FatWire, open source, open market sort of products. And at that time, our customers between 2000 and 2003 were Industry Canada, StatsCan, CHN, with basically deals with those kind of WCM-based systems. But around about 2004-05, market was completely changing. Open source was becoming more and more important. Companies like Vignettes and FileNet and Service, etc., they were being acquired. And I think just about a month ago, FatWire, which is part of the Industry Canada, we're using that quite well. Now, basically open source for WCM as well as document management systems as well. So we knew that open source was going to be more and more important for WCM as well as ECM in general. And we actually, most of our business right now, almost about 80% is really just on Alfresco. So we've got a whole bunch of customers in Ottawa, Toronto, some NGOs as well. We're basically all Java developers simply because all the products that we've dealt with are all Java. Like I said, this is kind of some of our sort of key customers that we work with, particularly using Alfresco. So Mobility, again, a new player, we provided their document management system for all the customer care. So we actually build and customize the product for them, as well as the document power. We'll talk about a couple of slides for both of these. Out of the box, Alfresco does provide just kind of the standard document management kind of capabilities, which allows you to do revision tracking and security and government and all some of these features. However, most of these customers tend to typically have very specific requirements. They may want some different kind of workflows. They may want the user interface to be completely different, maybe simplify user interface, etc. But Alfresco is a platform. So what you get out of the box may be one thing, but almost everything can be seen customer. The entire UI, the entire all the workflow, the full capabilities, and so on and so forth. One of our recent customers is course administration. They haven't actually done much at this point until they just recently became customers. But again, they're just looking at some requirements, looking at some things like what they can do with the current data migration data. Royal College itself, very big customer. They've been on our Alfresco for just over a year and a half. They're looking at records management components, and we're going to help them do part of that. So. And again, so we're we try to take role partners. There's between 8 to 9 of us in the Toronto area. Most of our engagements are actually directly through Alfresco. The customers come to us directly or through Alfresco, and basically they let us know. We basically find out exactly what the requirements are, and if there's any customization that needs to be done, we basically go through the full process of requirements gathering, designing, and finally delivering and supporting. So primarily, Alfresco is a document management system. The version 1 was just document management, and some of the other components had sort of integrated within the systems. So collaboration basically allows you to create kind of a microsite, like a project, for example. You can invite different individuals to that project so that they can share other documents and make comments on wikis, blogs, discussion threads, so on and so forth. They've added the WCM components as well. Records management, which is the only DoD certified records management system that's out there on one source. And also there's email archiving. And I'll go through some of those actually. Yeah, just really sit the demo to get a sense of how it's actually available just in one study UI. So this is a couple of screenshots for what some of the features offers in terms of CMIS as well as SIFs and lineup integration. So the screenshot on the left is being shared drive. So the entire repository that's available within Alfresco can be available as a shared drive, so that you can basically drag and drop documents and open them up in Word and whatever application that they need to. the email integration is, well, it's IMAP integration available just out of the box, which allows you to export the entire library within your email client. This allows you to write any kind of rules on your inbox, for example, any emails that are coming in that may be very useful for the system. So let me show you this screen here. This is actually a Linux VMware running on a laptop. And what I wanted to show you was how how SIFs or SAMWA is actually being used. So this is basically just out of the box, unmodified, uncustomized. So when I log in as user, let's just do that actually. So this is what Robert was referred to as a shared interface. This is the 2.0 Ajax kind of interface. And it looks more like a portal server in that you can define your own sort of a dashboard views and customize as to how many columns and what kind of dashboards that you need to see. So right now we're looking at sort of 3 columns. And these are called dashboards, not portal views. GSR certified, GSR 168 certified, but the development is actually a lot easier from the developers. So I can customize the dashboard by defining how many columns. For example, we'll use 3 columns. Change the layout to column 2, column 1, so forth, cancel that. And then within the 3 columns that are defined, I can now add additional dashboards. And as developers, this is typically what we need to do. If we're integrating Alfresco with anything else, for example, remote repository, a database, we'll write a new dashboard and then we'll basically drag and drop anything that's available. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we've done for Algonquin Power, Mobility, and MDocs, and a whole bunch of other customers. So again, it's very simple. Again, from a developer's point of view, it's an extensible platform. So this is what we get sort of out of the box, but let me just show you the screenshots before. Yeah. So Mobility really wanting to see a very, very clean sort of UI, nothing. There's no menus at the top, just wanting to basically see different sort of dashes where we're basically sort of rendering different types of documents, whether it's FAQs or documents around products and so on and so forth. Because most of the customers who are using this are actually, they don't want to know anything about sort of how to navigate through the documents, management system, etc. So based on their requirements. So again, to do something like this, it just takes maybe less than a couple of weeks to do. Another example, Algonquin Power. Again, what they really wanted to do was that each department within Algonquin Power needed to manage their own type of content. So, for example, health and safety will have their own documents and events and calendar and functions and so on and so forth. And then when the company users essentially log in, their dashboard will be actually rendering content from some of those microsites. Just to give you an example of how microsites work. So when I log in as user Zahid, this is my standard dashboard, but within my dashboard I can create my own kind of my own microsites to which I can invite other people. So let's say sites are some other microsites. I have a member space, but within the site itself, I can now create my own wikis and blogs and document libraries, calendar, and so on and so forth. So all the information that exists in here, I can programmatically make that accessible to any other dashboard at the higher level. And that's what Algonquin Power here we're doing. So for example, you may have a couple of dashboards that are HR, for example, related documents. And the rule basically is that documents that have been added for the past 10 days will make it to that particular dashboard. And anybody who logs in will have to see the top 10 documents and so on and so forth. So this would have, events and any kind of information that I want to expose to the general type of user. Another example is MDocs. Again, this is just one column, multiple dashboards. They basically wanted to manage all of their vendors and trouble tickets, CRs, statement of works, and so on and so forth. All of the document basically has one dashboard, as one dashboard essentially, so that either the admins or the vendors can actually log in and basically manage all of the documents so that at the dashboard level, the Amdocs administration can actually basically look at what their vendors are doing for some of their clients. And again, something like this is very, very quickly to learn. This is another example of customized user interface for Alfresco. Here, we're actually managing not just documents, but if you think of a document that has a lot of metadata but no binary component, we basically just have a data type that has basically any number of attributes. So, for example, a doctor's, patients, services, they're all different types of content. They're all related to one another, and we can expose all this functionality to these objects. So, just quickly, within the document library of a given site, every user now has the option to create their own folder structure and their own documents. And another thing I wanted to talk about was aspects, which Scott mentioned in that video, and also about rules. So if I look at, let's say, images in this document here. So here's a PDF. I can start a workflow. I've got options to start a workflow or manage aspects. Aspects are a collection of metadata that you enable against each document, if you will, or against a given folder. So, for example, you may want to upload a PDF, which happens to be of HR type or maybe of an engineering type. But the documents now have different sets of metadata. So, what you would define essentially is an aspect, and then enable the aspect either programmatically based on a rule or explicitly, as I'm doing here. So, if I click on Manage Aspects, these are all the aspects that are currently available within the system that I can basically enable manually. And now, when I edit this document, I will have all these additional fields automatically available. So, at a programming level, from a developer's point of view, really it's very simple to add additional attributes as aspects, but the system itself will manage all the data entry forms and way to store the data and so on and so forth. So, it's very expensive. Another important feature of Alfresco is the management of rules, which are enabled on a given folder. So the rules could be that if anyone adds any kind of a document to this particular folder, then perhaps you want certain actions to take place. So for example, if anyone adds a GIF image to this folder, we want that GIF image to be converted to a JPEG, an email being sent out, and some other notification. These things can be put together as rules. So here's, I'm going to try and create a rule here. Let's create a rule for, let's see. So items are created or entered in this folder. What type of items should they be? Let's say auto type. So if the author of any of these documents whose names begin with Z, for example, I can add any number of conditions. So basically, the rules are looking for certain type of conditions, whether it's MIME type or user or creating data, so on and so forth. Once those conditions are met, then it's going to perform a certain action. So whether the action could be, send an email or transform to another, format. Let's say send an email, for example. And here now we can say, well, what's the content of the email? What should be, where should the email go, etc. So I can string together a lot of conditions and create very, very complex rules as to what happens when somebody adds a document or deletes a document or updates a document, and so on and so forth. So for example, one of the things, in fact, a lot of the functionality that I just talked about that I'm showing you can all be done sort of programmatically. So a developer could basically write these rules programmatically so that, for example, if the JPEG image is being added to a folder, then an email is basically sent somewhere else, or maybe a copy sent somewhere else, and for record purposes, or maybe perhaps for auditing purposes, any kind of reporting that needs to be created can all be sort of put together. So rules are extremely powerful. I can also enable aspects, again, depending on the MIME type, for example. And just between aspects of those, the entire system can be. So in addition to some of these rules and aspects, there's a standard revision blocks and so on and so forth. And again, as I mentioned, all of this content that is available at the site level can also be explored programmatically at the main user dashboard. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we've done for biodiversity, carbon power, NGOs, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so this Flexbooks actually was one of the more sort of complicated sort of applications, simply because these are content lists and documents. So these are just objects with a lot of metadata and the integration of doctor object with patient object, so on, so to create a full application. Any questions at this point?
We'll get to the Q&A probably at the tail end, and you guys can dive into a few things. So.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go over some of the basic sort of features of what the dashboard has to offer, what the sites concept are, what the collaboration features are. So this is what we're looking at here is Alfresco Share, which is document management as well as collaborative collaboration. So the records management part basically is another site that's that the system allows you to define. The same is true for WCM. With WCM, all the HTML pages, JavaScript, so on and so forth are again sort of hierarchies of different folders and files that are managed as documents. So the standard features for rules, aspects, historical version tracking, and so forth are inherent at every level of every object. So the entire hierarchy of content, whether it's at a site level or at a repository level, is also available as an example through SIFS and CMS. So here I'm actually connecting this Alfresco repository to my Mac environment. As you can see, Alfresco sites, this is the Coma site, document library, images, these are all the so this is again using SIFS. As you can see, there's a couple of exe files, but that's not very useful in the Mac environment. But when you drag and drop any kind of document or show detail or check in and check out, these functions get fired up within Alfresco. So now, a lot of our customers are actually just using SIFS to manage all of their very, very large documents like CAD files and so on and so forth. These are gigabytes of files that they have just managed on the network. And using SIFS basically to open up or work with the application that they typically work with is AutoCAD or using SharePoint, PowerPoint, etc. And basically using Alfresco as a repository, as a backend for the content. The front end can be either their own applications or Drupal can particularly use as a front end and integrate with Alfresco using CMI protocols. So again, very easy to customize the shared UI, very easy to integrate to Alfresco as a vector project.
We're winding down here. I've got a few extra slides that I want to talk about with collaboration, mobile, and a few things for engagement, and then we're going to go off into a Q&A, and then we'll let you go off to have lunch and go back to your regular fun jobs. So one thing I wanted to mention, which made me think of, we actually looked at the content rule machinery on a folder, but there is a workflow that applies even to a file. So when you throw a file somewhere, I like that you can throw it off into a workflow. and then it brings you a list of the workflows available to you. And a quick ad hoc one that I always like is a quick decision to say, I want to fire this workflow off to these people in Canada. Whoever approves in what order is irrelevant to me. Or you can throw it off, say, I want it to this way. Once he approves, it'll go to this guy. Once he approves, it'll go to that lady, and so on until the cycle is done. So a good example of just ad hoc available workflows still available through the UI. A last note on Alfresco. One thing that we like about the corporate heads, they have a very rigid certification process. So with Drupal, you can become a stamped Drupal certified developer, programmer, integrator. Even there are ways with partnerships and whatnot to try to certainly build up your acumen as a Drupal integrator. But with Alfresco, to be a gold certified partner, you have to have at least 2 or more certified Alfresco developers. And that does entail going down to Atlanta. You've got 1 week in-house training at their facility, and then you have 2 attempts at getting 75% or more off their online accreditation site. So we do like that you can formally become a certified Alfresco developer. Both Zahid and Mahmood are both certified. So just winding down as a summation here, collaborative has been something that's been discussed a lot, and there are some options in Drupal with respect to being collaborative. Collaborative will fall, it's the same as Web 2.0. What does that mean? Especially today. So collaborative can mean a heck of a lot of things, and what does it mean for you, what do you need? And there are options, and I think that transparency of we couldn't care less which platform you wouldn't necessarily pick, there are options on a few of these. So Drupal natively has a commenting machinery. So on any piece of content or content type, you can set up a workflow for commenting, and you could say, enable commenting, no different than you see a CDC article, and you allow threading right at the bottom of that. So forums and external discussion areas are a little bit passe. You're starting to see more inline threading and inline discussions. So Drupal does have that native to itself, and it has a workflow machinery, very similar action, and this action do this, etc. that Zahid was talking. So there are some similarities in Drupal that you could potentially do that. Alternatively, I mentioned how people are using Drupal as a platform, and there's 2 good examples here of products that are coming out into the marketplace, have been out of the marketplace. One is OpenAtrium. This is the product out of the box, which is more or less built towards a collaborative environment. Setting up a theme room, having RSS feeds, shoutbox, some tasks that you can assign people. That said, it's built off Drupal core, but it's fairly modified and has a lot of extended components in it. Where accessibility falls into that, where multilingual falls into that, I'm not sure. It's not as mature. It just sort of came out of beta not too long ago. Very interesting to see, what this component's doing. Alternatively, another collaborative environment, Drupal Commons, which is actually by Agria, again shows a collaborative environment. These are based off Drupal. You see how having an environment like Alfresco, if you're document-centric, or maybe there's some enterprise components that may fall into that, there are options. So alternatively, Alfresco Share is a little bit more, it's a turnkey collaborative team space. Action, very solid action workflow that's very dynamic. So business process management interface with options. Do I want to use the JVM, or do I want to use activity, or that aspect. You can do full document management and everything else that Zahid walked through. Those may be big assets into using collaborative framework that surrounds what you've just demoed for Share. So evidently the fact that it's quite mature and supported and you can get enterprise, that may be another big factor. So, there are options there with respect to collaboration. A couple of quick slides on mobile, and then we'll probably be tapping off into a bit of a Q&A. So everybody's been across the mobile boom, the mobile blitz, yet there's something about being the first to deliver some of these services that sometimes need to sit back and see what transpires from some of that. And not to anybody's surprise, there are a lot of options available to you. Some of them are quite interesting. So with respect to a mobile site, if you need to render out a mobile site, you can do that still strictly with URL and CSS mobile theme. So we do have a project that we're working on with the Standards Council, Mike and I, You're going to have the full Drupal desktop site, something internal for them to administer, and evidently a CSS mobile site. But we're just really managing layouts and leveraging CSS and browser detections to just deliver a site. So it's a simplified version of your site. That's a method. Another method is jQuery mobile. jQuery we love, and we're glad we never got on the Flash game because Apple pretty much killed Flash to a certain extent. But jQuery is a library that comes native with environments like Clone. It comes native also with the libraries that's already there with Drupal. But jQuery mobile is a set of a library that's geared more towards being accessible by all of these browser types. So the world doesn't start and end with an iPhone. Yes, that's what I use, but there's a lot of other players in the game. There are a lot of other OSs you can do. If you want to get to more of an app framework, we've deployed a couple of jQuery mobile applications, and you really get lost whether you think, okay, is this an iPhone app? You really can't tell the difference to certain aspects of it. So an address gets tossed at you, you can throw it out into the maps, it reads a phone number, dial the phone number directly. So and the UI and the behaviors and the calls of displaying things really make it quite interesting as far as the look and feel of a mobile app. That said, it's still browser-based, it's still a URL. Interestingly enough, there is a manifest, so you can download and be local and work offline, do things, and whenever there's a connection, it can work there. So it can be offline. But more interestingly is if you're tapping into environments such as, then there's PhoneGap. I've got another slide where I'll be talking about PhoneGap, where if you actually want a native mobile app, there are some options there that you should consider. And on that note, I think a lot of people went down the road of, okay, we're going to do an iPhone app. We did an iPhone app. iPhones are popular and iTunes rocks, and we're going to do an iPhone app. But there has actually been a reversal of some of this going on here. I've got two good examples. So with iTunes, there are some lessons with New York Times and ESPN. There are some good articles and whatnot that have been published where they're regressing back. If you already have your audience, you really have to question whether you want to do an iPhone app and throw it up on iTunes. You're going to pay 30%. And if you're a subscriber-based service, such as ESPN and New York Times, you can see why they've left the iPhone platform. The app might still be there, but they went to jQuery, and there were some interesting articles where they even comparing the two side by side. You couldn't tell the difference between an actual iPhone app and a jQuery app. But by it being jQuery, it's transparent. It'll work on a lot of other browsers and a lot of other devices. So you're definitely killing a few birds with one stone, and you don't need the iPhone iTunes environment to promote your app. So typical Google Android, which is open source based, and I've heard some interesting stories there where they've had a bit of a mixed model. It is open source. There was a lot of work being done internally with Android, but they were also going out to the community and rewarding them and giving out big bonus to people that were contributing some significant code. But it is interesting to see how Google's presence is more than putting a dent into this industry. Google's a bit under the radar. So my wife bought a Samsung Ericsson phone the other day, and she's been using it for a while, and she doesn't realize it's running Android on it. And I'm willing to trade my Android phone for iPhone. Once I start playing with it, you realize the openness of it again. It does open up other things, but it's now running on over 100 devices. And this is pretty staggering. I think that they've got over 500,000 activations a day. So they say that by 2013, 40% of all internet traffic will be done on mobile devices. That's pretty staggering. So we know that any decision you make when it comes to ECM or CMS has to factor that. It has to be able to play with that and play with it well. So everything you've heard today does have a transitional factor into the mobile environment. When you look at Apple, I say too greedy and I use those two examples, but Apple has proven that, they're now the largest IT company in the world. They've got like $70 billion in assets. It's gotten quite ridiculous how they went from something to nothing to everything, just like that. But they have proven that they can be very restrictive, and they'll make their decisions and they'll follow through with that. They have cult-like following. And, that only goes so far with respect to what we can do, however, in our role in IT. We can't put everything in the holy grail on their end, and nor would we want to, I think. BBM, I've heard some interesting stories there with developers writing letters out to RIM. We actually did a project for the University of Waterloo on Plone, And we heard a lot of first-hand stories. This was for the Institute of Quantum Computing, which RIM is a big investor. We had to hide all our iPhones and leave them in the car. We went to the meetings. It was sort of fun. But we've heard of stories that when you're a developer and you want to build an app on a BlackBerry device, they make it difficult. And sometimes you have to buy in, and there's letters that have been written by developers to say, well, it should be exactly the opposite, where you make it easy for developers to adopt this technology, and they sort of did the opposite. And I think we're seeing some of the misfortunes from RIM happening right now. Not that they won't be around, but in the future, well, it'll all change. We don't know what's coming in the future, but I think showing the flexibility and the ability to adapt is always more capable on the FOSS side than it is with somebody else. And you take the agendas out of the mix and the for-profit decision making, you can see how logic can sort of prevail where things should go. A lot of these new smartphone devices really just rely on HTML5 and CSS3, but it is interesting how there is a Drupal module that's available from PhoneGap, which sort of brings some of this together. We haven't had an opportunity to play with it just yet, but if you have to have a native app, for example, if you want an Android because you've got to tap into the camera, let's say with the device, or you want to tap into the GPS, you sort of have to leave that jQuery mobile and go to a native app. So this is a way that your single source base, just powered by these devices, it's sort of a single code deploy many scenario, if you will, where through PhoneGap you can have different service mobile platforms supported. So the last couple of slides before we jump into the Q&A, and I think we'll be right on time. So engagement. It's something that is important in this presentation. It's not about sales for us so much per se, but we do have vested interest in making sure that there aren't many false starts with Drupal and Alfresco. So we want to make sure that you guys see it from our point of view as well. So I tend to look at myself and the way my career unfolded, and I look at an adoption of traditional systems. So if I think of Domino, for example, I went in and I got my certification, and here's Domino Designer, and there's my whole world. And if I'm managing people like myself, there are their tool sets, and you just give them what they need to do, and there's their world. There's no grayness in that, and it's set for everybody for the most part. Yes, you can use Lotus script versus JavaScript and decisions of that nature, but your tools are your tools, and that's that. You'd be crazy to run in a Drupal environment that would be vanilla. There's no way you're not going to depend and have to make some critical decisions on how you're going to be using Drupal. Like I mentioned, there's no WYSIWYG that even comes with Drupal, Drupal 7. So there are some, you can see the requirements there for saying, well, should I run the web admin toolbar? Yeah, it's going to see 150 clicks a day if you're this type. So there's a lot of little scenarios that can alter your perception and your experience with using Drupal. So, lessons learned go a long way here, a lot more so than an experienced software developer versus not, as an example. So, to be using the right modules that we know are multilingual, that we know are well supported, some of them get large enough that they get brought into the actual core of Drupal. I believe CCK was the case, right? So the content toolkit is now. So creating content types used to be an add-on for Drupal 6, and now it's native to Drupal 7. So there is definitely a series of, we'll vary between maybe 7 to 15 or so modules that we'll deploy with every build that we do with Drupal. Evidently for us, it's a tool set that we've got, we don't have to install each module one by one, and with profiling, Will that worked for us and fortunately left to go to StatsCan, but worked on building some profiles there that'll be an asset to us. And sharing is one thing when you look at it from a directive of Mike contributing code to Drupal, but if you think of interdepartmental, there are huge assets to be gained there, and I mean huge. So sharing profiles, sharing themes, those are things that are available to you. So if you look at other environments, it's hard to, even within governments, to get that shared connection happening and that transparency. So the last thing we want to see is under-adoption or loss of dormant potential. So having people that are seasoned in this industry is important. And we want to reduce some unwarranted false starts. And again, stories I heard from GTech where somebody had deployed Drupal 6, played around with it, and sort of tossed it away like it was nothing. It's more of, wait a second, your experience wasn't really fully warranted. You should have talked to somebody that really knows the tools, and so it's very, very dynamic. Chances are every Drupal environment you'll see with the government will have features embedded right in them that aren't in others. So it's a very dynamic setup. So getting some consulting and discovery and planning is important. I have a lot of friends in the industry, and there are those analysts that have never changed their ways and probably never will. They know the tool set that they know, and whenever they're engaged, that's what they preach. That's getting irresponsible on consultants to be able to do that at this point. I think they have a duty to become familiar with these tools. So anybody that sat in today for the whole presentation will probably be more familiar with than a lot of consultants that are out there with respect to open source. So that's a big factor. It is important that you engage us as a community. Now, we don't make money whether you guys go with Drupal or Alfresco, and when you do, there's no gravy train for us with respect to that factor. So we only make money on the time that we end up selling and working and interacting with you. So good consulting is not only worth it for you guys, but it's definitely how we make more or less our bread and butter. It's a little different when you've got advocacy efforts going on from Microsoft because there's reason for it, but in this case, that's not more or less how things break out. So just to reiterate, don't buy into these tools because they're free. Certainly it's a weighted factor for you as an evaluation process, but the big thing moving forward will be talk to a Modus rep if you guys want to get a meeting. The procurement environment is quite challenging with government. It's quite confusing. Janet will mention a few things closing off here. If you don't have a Modus rep, some of you came here directly, certainly feel free to inquire with me directly. If you're working with government, there's a good likelihood that we have to find ways through procurement to make sure that it works. Keep in mind, we talked about shared services. It's nice that there isn't necessarily a procurement requirement. Think of that. You can't get into Drupal, you can't get into Alfresco internally or without having to get through procurement. So there's an element there. If you make decisions internally that you like these platforms, there are good options available to you. A, you don't have to buy in. You could maybe just use consultants to help with the lessons learned aspect or prototyping and whatnot. But B, they have transparency aspect, the fact that you can do this in-house completely if you choose, if you have the right to set up an internal acumen. So, Janet, did you want to maybe mention a few things on procurement? I think you... Sure. I don't know if you have anything...
As Robin mentioned, there is no need for, in these situations where the open source products for hardware and software, so there's no need to go through a DISO. It's really, the focus is on the consulting services. So we've had experience with some of our clients who've used the TBIPS procurement vehicle, the SBIPS procurement vehicle, and it's really to get those services in so that you can understand what your requirements are, maybe do a business case, understand what your strategy is, what your needs are. So again, as Robin said, feel free to reach out to your Modus account manager or to contact Robin directly, and we can facilitate a meeting if you want to learn more about using those vehicles and how you would go about that.
We also have examples. I remember at GTech last year, I think it was George from Near Canada walked up to me and said, he did find it frustrating that if you like a tool and you know you want to use it, you should be able to go to the market and ask for it. One thing's for sure, you don't have to go to the market and ask for a CMS. You can go out to the market and ask for a Drupal CMS integration on Mercs if that's the case. So, again, understanding the procurement angles are interesting, but we do have examples, and a Canadian Transport Agency was, I think, one of the first ones to deploy a tender out on Mercs, just saying, hey, we want a Drupal CMS integration. Help us out. So you don't have to go to the market and say, no different than you would ask for SharePoint or otherwise. So there was some misconceptions there that I think were unclear. But the best thing is just to have a dialogue and see what's involved with potentially moving forward if you have interest. So that pretty much wraps it up. I can't believe I'm so bang on for time. I was almost late on my own wedding. So we got about 10-15 minutes, and certainly we're available. We're glad to stay, and we're going to be staying and chatting with any of you. But we had some questions, some Q&As that we had somewhat ready. I'll definitely open it up to you guys. But some of the Q&As that we had we've already answered through this, so some of those might have fell off the radar. You know, how can Drupal interact with Alfresco, and there are examples that we sort of talked about that. So I think the best thing is just to throw it off to the floor. If you guys have any questions, definitely please feel free. Go ahead and ask anything you want. That book is up for grabs. Does anybody have anything they want to throw? Go ahead, Drew.
Scenario with regard to Alfresco. A lot of shops will have common shared drives, and probably a question that a lot of people have is, you have an organizational unit with a shared drive, or organizational units with multiple shared drives. What's a scenario, or describe a quickest route to adding Alfresco on top of that? Like, what's the integration? What's a high level overview of the integration? Is there any kind of like a migration that has to happen? Are there avenues to come to a quick functional opportunity by just adding it on top of what you already have here?
Well, first of all, Alfresco does integrate with Active Directory, LDAP, so whatever users' permissions are allocated available to you through the OS. Then beyond that, you can make just the appropriate part of the repository accessible to that particular user, depending on who's logged in. Beyond that, you can just basically drag and drop a whole bunch of content to migrate your content. Essentially, this is what a lot of the customers are using. So, for example, the example that I was showing you, there's an images folder, you want to drag and drop 100 images, now you're essentially adding content to the repository. At the same time, you could also be doing check-in and check-outs programmatically. You may have enabled some rules on some of those folders. So behind the rules, behind the scenes, some of those rules may also be executed as you're dragging and dropping. So basically, at the user interface level, not a lot is happening, but a lot of the behind the scenes, quite a number of other things could be happening. It could be archiving stuff, it could be copying or migrating or transforming content.
And related question: given that a lot of departments, from what I'm aware, are using the free version of SharePoint, it just comes like a service. So another scenario that I'm suspecting is quite common is we'll have a department without any formal ECM in place, but with a number of SharePoint sites using the free version in for the interim until they figure out what their broader ECM is going to be. So in that scenario, do you have any comments on experience with migration from SharePoint, or how would Alfresco work with, let's say, you have some SharePoint content?
There is a component called OpenMigrate that I actually took out of the slides last night. I should have left it in there. But there's a client we're dealing with at Career, I think they've already left, they're in Documentum. And there are tools to facilitate migration. So there is a component built by, another aspect of it, other than the fact that it's open source software, is you've got a community. And with Alfresco, you've got very specific, you've got somebody that's got applications specifically for healthcare. You're going to have somebody that's got a specific application for facilitating the migration. So it is a component to Alfresco that's called OpenMigrate that can facilitate migrating from, and migrated can be rules, content, and a few other components that involve ECMs from Documentum or from SharePoint and a few of the others. So with respect to migration, which is often the task at hand, there's what the state of that data was before and after migration.
I'd like to add something to this. I'm in Transport Canada, and we're very much integrated with Guardians. I know the way, I kind of know the way everybody's thinking the Tiger teams are in shared services. And it seems like right now a lot of departments invested in RDIMS, as you're familiar with docs and so forth. The way to the future at this point appears to be GC docs. I hope I'm not bringing anything new to you, which is Content Server 2010. The one thing I see as a whole in this whole process is the digital management, the digital assets management, which RDMs doesn't do well at all. For those of us who use it, you know. So that's, I think I would see this as a potential. When I'm talking about video, images, and so forth. For the documents, I think at this point we're in a state where we're waiting for guidance from shared services once the SOR is completely over with. So that's one thing. The other thing is, so that's for the ECM part. I think it's difficult to come up at this point and go completely out on such a product. It looks like a great product, but right now I think there's some decisions to be made over the next year or so. On the Drupal side, on the other hand, one of the things that we like, we're currently working on the Web 2.0 project, which is really e-collaboration. And I find that the product, the Drupal product, offers a lot because it has a functionality to provide connectivity to existing infrastructure, such as RDIMS, but also we're an IIS shop, we're a Microsoft shop, .NET framework and all this. I know this is based for Java, it's kind of was initially designed for Java, I believe, and for, what's the technology, the server side, Apache, I believe, the original. And I think now with some of the module, it allows us to integrate with things like RDIMS and also have IIS as a front end. So this is the way we're actually, I'm just making, it's the point, not a question, it's just a point I'm making. And we're looking at that in that direction currently at Transport Canada.
My personal opinion with shared services is that they'll achieve their goal of being able to save government money by just putting everybody on hold to know what's going to happen with shared services. I don't know how long that's going to take. There's an element there of, you know, the pace, and rightfully so, government's a huge machinery, and the pace of you know, we know that we won't be able to throw out Alfresco and have it be swallowed up and it'll magically become available to PWGSC. And the Treasury Board have done it with the Shared Services Initiative. But we do know that FOSS demands a presence and be recognized as an option. And that's all we can really ask for. I think it's probably in our nature as far as ethics and whatnot to say, here's the tool, here's what it does. What we are hearing a lot is, like you said, I've got digital asset management is actually an example of one that came up from fisheries, I believe, where I've got this need, but I know that it's going to be difficult with what I've got now. Well, now you see a FOSS option that you can deploy that can work well with your other environments. So I think taking anything away from your statement, the important aspect is both Drupal and Alfresco do have the mandate behind them as being a FOSS platform to be as openly and able to work with as many systems as possible. It's not an accident that when they were showing how Drupal can work with their environments that they hover over the Oracle driver. You probably noticed that one too. But evidently it comes back to that tool. How open is RDIMS and what are the options available to these tools? And the reality is with CMIS you can do a lot, but sure, it'll still, you can still go into a DVC route. There's a million routes you can potentially take. The flexibility of that just becomes in what other tools are you trying to find yourself out to. So with respect to running it, Alfresco will run natively on Windows. So we've run it on the Amazon EC2 cloud. We've done some interesting things with the cloud environment where our own ECM version of Alfresco, we're running on an EC2 instance, but we're tapping into the S3 for the storage because it's so cheap. So the storage aspect. So everything you're doing through the EC2, all the data is getting stored off to the storage aspect of it. But we've ran that through an AMI image that was running a Windows server interface, and that was fine. The area, I guess, where I get slightly uncomfortable with going into a Microsoft environment is, if you have to fully support PHP and do those types of things on a Windows environment, yes, there are ways around it. So it shouldn't be, we believe Drupal is better, period, and for a lot of reasons and in a lot of ways, therefore it's still the best CMS. Whether you're running a Windows environment or not, there are options there to run it. But the one I was referring to earlier is through web services. I can give you a couple of links where Microsoft has a web services area that you can run, and as long as you're running a Windows server with IIS, you can automatically fire up Drupal to run in that. But it was an Apria package that was built. And again, Apria is the same as the Drupal core, just they added a couple of extra modules.
Yeah, one of the things that's happened over the last number of years is that Microsoft has really kind of put a lot of initiative into open source. There are efforts like Codeplex, which is basically like a kind of a source forge for open source projects in the .NET platform. But there's also, in terms of support for products like Drupal, products like Moodle and things like that, they have a product called Web Matrix, which is available, and it allows the installation of different open source packages, including Active Drupal and PHP packages. PHP is increasingly becoming more of a first-class language in the IIS kind of stack. They're doing a lot in terms of integrations with IIS to facilitate bringing in tools like Drupal and PHP-based tools into a Windows environment. So if you look into tools like Web Matrix, and they have integration with SQL Server Express and all these other tools to try to facilitate lightweight development in PHP in that platform. So that's another way you can
to meet some contracting guidelines. There's always been the scenario so that we've run a Windows server with VMware and then running a lab stack on that. But
there's all.
Could you expand a little on the zero footprint install on the desktop? And to me, there's a disconnect between email integration, drive, drag and drop facilities, and integration with Office without having any components of the desktop.
So for the shared drive, just as SIFs is being used with SAMWare essentially. So what I need to basically on the Alfresco side is basically expose the SIFs component, and any network that's essentially sort of have that sort of shared drive available. So there's zero footprint in that sense. So now you can use whatever application you need to, because it's just a shared drive.
That's our protocol.
Yeah. So, but there is Alfresco does support SharePoint protocol, which means that you can use Microsoft products to open documents directly from within the application. There is actually a small component for Office, for example. For the IMAP integration, again, it's IMAP is a standard. So in your inbox, for example, you'll see a repository for Alfresco that you can sort of drag and drop. So again, there's no additional components required.
There's a few ways that you can make it interact with Office as well. At one point, we had a plugin, so there is a plugin aspect. If you don't want to support the SharePoint protocol, and there is that does leave potentially footprints. You would have to go to each workstation and potentially install this plugin. That's one option. But again, if you're supporting the SharePoint protocol, then it's more or less there as a protocol available in Word to go in and out. But those are streets that have been paved by Microsoft, which we have to work around. So some people aren't necessarily a SharePoint shop, but will use a SharePoint protocol because from an Office standpoint, it can reduce the footprint. Anybody else?
So I'm curious about buy and sell. So you guys worked on buy and sell, so it was a new Drupal installation. So probably the content came from all over the place.
Yeah.
Is the content residing natively in different places, or was it all brought into that Drupal site?
They've definitely they're evolving the process. So initially there was an effort to go out and bring it all, or to bring as much as they could into Drupal, but then realized that there's certain two audiences, both people who are inside government as well as those people who are outside government. You needed to go out and to be very careful about what data was being displayed, and are using Drupal very much as a way to filter into other databases and pull out information that is public facing. They're also looking at building applications within the buy and sell site that they've set up, so that other agencies can have a section of buy and sell to go off to either connect with their own sites, or be able to push products that are not push products, push opportunities or
to link into other sections that make it easier for government to be able to procure the needs that they have with the public sector, and the public sector to be able to work with government. Does that sort of answer your question?
Were they able to connect people to say like GC Docs or Arctic as an integration form?
I don't know if they are connected with RDIMS. I don't think so, but it is possible that they have done that. I'm clear about them doing that, but we were last involved with them last year, and they're working on extending and pushing it further and looking at making the platform to their needs and fitting with everything. They were able to go out and establish buy and sell GC.ca much more quickly than they would have otherwise been able to implement with ITSE, and that's part of the reason that they went with Drupal, because there was an opportunity to quickly go out and deliver an implementation that was able to meet the core requirements and was able to prototype quickly and show it to people who were to the various different business owners who were going to need to access the site.
There's a logic you do keep in mind. Like solar is something that I'm finding more and more attractive, and it's something that we're going to be leveraging quite a bit for the Standards Council of Canada. They've got sort of a 25 years of a dozen databases spread everywhere and whatnot. And if you have access to an index of whatever you're running, I think our notion is to tap into a protocol or a support or a connector and get to the data. I think that's a knee-jerk reaction. But it is interesting that if there's an index available or accessible, you can leverage solar to go out and harness those indexes, whatever the platform is. And that's one area that's an approach that we're taking with a few clients. So, the interesting part with this project, we'll see a couple of reasons for that is if you want to get into, let's say, faceted search, or you want to have unified search. So now you can tap on to 5 different areas looking up specific keywords. And yes, there's a lot of taxonomy playing, but from what I've heard today and talking with Will quite a bit, that even things like if you've got language tags as FR or Francais, or it can unify those, where you can still then do faceted search and pick, okay, show me only the French stuff. Show me on. So there's call it the taxonomy massaging, if you will, to try to make the uniform index come back a certain way. And from what I've heard, also there's the option of the data is sitting somewhere else, but think as setting up a pseudo content type that's not actually to store data, but just to present data from another solar index. So you could be presenting information by leveraging solar via Drupal without having to do a full CMS call or DBC or which method, REST or whatever method you want to connect to another database environment. So leveraging an index can go a long way, I think.
We developed an internal web wrapper around the index 5.3.5.2. That's our way for us to expose and be able to use a product like Drupal and connect basic stuff.
Web service stuff.
Exactly. So, and that's what we're going to be testing as a proof of concept in the next couple of months. Interesting. For our departments.
The conversation about solar is really interesting, and it's worth pointing out that in Drupal 7, the new version of views, which is kind of a visual query builder, where you say, these are the fields I want to display, these are the filters and the sorts, and here's the display style. There's a table, there's a list, there's a slideshow. The new version of that module actually supports more than just SQL as a backend for your data, and it's an arbitrary data source. And Solar is one of the ones that's supported. So it actually used Drupal to build a really quick prototype of a search user interface, a faceted search user interface, with really no development. And it's really quite exciting. This is something that I had one of our new developers who's new to Drupal do, and then he pulled in all the content from Drupal Planet, all the Drupal blogs like the aggregated there, into a Drupal site within a day. And the second day, he figured out the search API module, and then he had a faceted search UI on that with just my minimal prodding, and it's really exciting to see how much you can do constantly with those two tools. And I think that would be really interesting for people here.
Open source.
Solar is an Apache project. It's a Java-based. So the question was, is Solar open source as well? Solar is a sub-project of Apache, and it's distributed under the Apache license, which, just like the MIT license, is an open source license that is more permissive than the GPL. So basically, anything you could have done with the GPL license product with Drupal, you could do more with.
There's also William Hearn that worked for us and jumped the bridge at StatsCan. But you've been looking into Solar quite a bit, and I think you mentioned some of the capabilities of the enterprise components with Solar, which is still free, correct? Yeah. So there are some.
Well, it's free. It's free to use and deploy, but when we start actually deploy the production environment, they do really good support license. That's what the lucid imagination, like GUI wrapper to some of the initial Solar release. It's really useful in the fact that you can declare your fields automatically, and GUI does all these other things. But there's Solar and there's the lucid wrapper. So there's two kind of things.
And I'm not putting you on the spot, but the StatsCan, have they formally decided to move with Drupal?
It's still in the prototype stage.
Still in that lab, that basic lab. Any other questions?
Wait,
Go ahead, Alex.
Earlier there was mentioned about, I think, cloud computing briefly. I know that AWS, Amazon Web Services, was recently certified by the U.S. federal government, and that allows contractors to use AWS for deployment of open source products. It's a lot cheaper and more efficient to do it that way. I know that Treasury.gov is on it, and possibly WhiteHouse.gov is on that as well. Is there any similar cloud computing plus open source equals easy to deploy and easy to get started with?
A good topic. It's actually it's a problem and a frustration for me. We love Amazon, and we tend to do a lot through it. It's not on Canadian soil. Yeah. Those of you who've heard the bad things with respect to its outage that it had recently, that's only if you report your plan. So we were victims of that outage. They were out for 20-something days, but our sites were back up fairly. Like a snapshot, just fired back up, and away you go in another zone. So if you were unprepared, there was a way to do that. But most of our websites, including OpenPlus.ca, is all powered on the Amazon EC2 cloud. So we do love the environment. The Canadian soil aspect does make it, I don't know of a very good cloud that is on Canadian soil, to be honest. Now, the fact that, I don't know if you guys have heard, but Facebook and Apple's always had its own cloud, but Facebook is investing over $500 million, and with their money now, they could probably throw $12 billion at it and be fine. But Google, I believe, is starting there also. Everybody's getting on that cloud game, which I personally have concerns whether Google does it with respect to all that data. Ironically, the Canadian soil thing has been tricky because the U.S., that was a big factor, but it wasn't renewed in February last year where evidently some U.S. apps that have to be on U.S. soil, so the same goes both ways. But it is, we've always struggled to find a really good hosted environment. Evidently, you can do server colo and get on a good backbone, and that's that. There are some options in working with Institute of Quantum Computing. They put us on to a firm in Toronto that we use. All we really look for is resources. So whoever can give us the best resources and has the best backbone. We tend to not use Primus at all for anything. They've got a server colo, which is one thing, and that's been fine. But ironically, the Canadian soil thing has been used and abused. A lot of people use Google Analytics. Well, where do you think that data is sitting? It's on US soils. So if it is a requirement, evidently that's what's good about these tools is they're not necessarily cloud-based. You can run them yourself in your own environment. If you want to host in your environment, there are plenty of Canadian soil.
Has there been any conversation about the government of Canada setting up for its own internal use a cloud-based server that any department can?
I think the guy that's managing that is the guy in charge of shared services and he's been doing it for 4 or 5 years. But I know PWGSC has been looking at getting into a more virtual environment where PWGSC you can get different types of hosted environments. I know that they are very costly compared to something that'll run you a couple of $1,000s a year, will run you 30 or 40,000 or so. We have a couple of clients so it is quite costly. The biggest problem I've heard with that, though, is support. That the help desk is slow in response when we've got some apps that are running even hosting PWGC. That'll likely change a bit, but I've heard rumors that cloud and VMware are confusing to a lot of people. There's certainly a shift there. I mean, VMware is setting its pace, but I've heard that PWGC wants to be cloud going, but who knows what's going to happen with shared services, but I definitely won't hold my breath on any of that. You probably already heard I was going to say that.
In your experience of a cloud where either Drupal or the other product resides, what's the slowest link so that the end user performance is still very acceptable? Because we have some remote sites that are as slow as a T1 1.5 or 3 megabit.
Well, that's a good point. Even off our own website, when I use our own ECM, Alfresco, it's up on. So if I'm going to be feeding it some large files, and even something over 50 meg, it's a web upload. So you got to think of it that way too. So you can get into a mixed environment where you can, that's where the consulting and planning is a big aspect. So how big are your files going to be? Like Zahid mentioned, there are very set verticals in Alfresco, which I like. So the health sector has a very good set of verticals. The legal sector is doing quite well in Alfresco, and there's even the engineering side, where you can imagine large projects like this architectural project, the CAD files and managing all that. You can see how Alfresco makes a lot of sense. But very good point. You got a gate file. I come from an imaging bureau background where we had the Sears catalog. You can imagine the data that took back then. We were moving as much data as a bank. Just for like one big issue of the Sears catalog. So moving that over the internet for no reason is certainly a big factor. So on the cloud, that's a potential downfall. There are ways, there is a replication service that's available in Alfresco. So there are a few ways and a few workarounds there. George, just for the record, I think the Drupal 7 book's yours.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. First question. Good. Big Drupal.
All your answers are.
Great. Thanks, guys.